The street outside is a canvas of grey, a wet, suffocating London fog that clings to the cobblestones like a shroud. But look there, just ahead, the anchor and crown. From the outside it looks like a sanctuary. A soft amber glow bleeds through the frosted glass windows, promising warmth, a bit of laughter, and perhaps, for a few copper coins, an escape from the biting November damp. You can hear the muffled roar of life inside, the rhythmic clinking of pewter tankards, the low, guttural murmur of 100 tired men, and the faint, sweet strain of a concertina playing a tune that's almost forgotten. You push the door open and the world changes. Not just with coal smoke, but with the heavy, cloying scent of stale ale, sawdust on the floor, wet wool, and the unmistakable sharp tang of gin. It hits you like a physical weight. And there, standing behind the dark scarred wood of the bar, polished to a near black shine by decades of rough elbows, is she. You might look at her and see a simple girl serving drinks. You might imagine her life is filled with the easy chatter of a tavern maid. But you would be wrong. In the East End of 886, being a barmaid was not a job. It was a performance, stake survival game played in the most volatile room in Victorian London. She isn't just pouring beer. She is reading the room, measuring the volatile temper of a docker who'd been hauling heavy crates since 5 in the morning, dodging the wandering hands of sailors, and calculating the exact moment a friendly debate over wages might turn into a brawl that could shatter the entire establishment. She is visible to everyone, yet protected by almost no one. Behind that counter she is the keeper of the peace, the confidante, the target, and the clock watcher. Every smile she gives is a calculated maneuver. Every refusal is a delicate dance around danger. She knows the weight of a man's frustration before he even steps to the bar. She knows that if she drops a glass, it's not just a mess, it's a sign of weakness that could invite disaster. As the gaslights flicker above, casting long dancing shadows across the sawdust, the noise rises. Tonight, like every other night, she is the anchor in this storm. But what is it like, truly, to spend 12 hours a day, sometimes 14 in this space, where the line between a respectable living and total ruin is as thin as a glass rim? Tonight, we aren't just looking at history, we are stepping into her shoes. We are breathing the air of the East End, feeling the ache in our feet, and learn what it meant to hold the world together when the world was trying its hardest to tear you down. The channel Sleepy History with Benedict is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. How does one find them here? Not in the grand parlours of West London, but in the heart of Whitechapel, where poverty is as common as the morning mist. If you ask most of these women, the answer is simple. Desperation is a very effective career counsellor. For a young woman in the 8880s, the options were stark. You could work in a match factory, where the phosphorus fumes would slowly rot your jawbone. You could take in laundry, breaking your back over tubs of boiling water for pennies that barely covered the rent of a cold, damp room. Or you could hope for a position in domestic service, which often meant being owned by an employer from dawn until midnight, with no life of your own to speak of. Then there was the pub. Pub work, the neighbours would whisper, with a wrinkle of the nose that spoke volumes. It wasn't considered respectable. A woman behind a bar was seen as loose, a target for gossip and moralising busybodies who had never spent a day in the trenches of the working class. Yet to those who actually lived the life, the pub offered something the factory could not: cash in hand, and perhaps a slight better view of the world. You recall the day you heard about the vacancy at the Anchor and Crown. A friend, A woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue who worked in a pawn shop had mentioned it over a meal of bread and dripping. "Dolly Farrow is looking for a girl," she said, cutting a piece of dry crust. "It's hard work, mind. You'll be on your feet until your veins ache, but you eat, you get paid, and you are inside out of the rain." You were hesitant. You knew the reputation. To stand behind a bar was to invite the gaze of every man who walked through the door. It was to be a statue in a room full of people who sometimes forgot how to be civilized. But then you thought of the alternative, the soot-stained windows of the laundry, the cough that never left your lungs, the constant, gnawing hunger. So you walked down Commercial Street, the air thick with the smell of horse manure and the sound of iron-rimmed wheels on stone. You passed the women selling flowers, their hands raw and red. You passed the men leaning against the brickwork, eyes scanning the street for work that would never come. When you reached the pub you paused. The wood was dark, the windows were grimy, and the noise from within was a roar of humanity that made your heart hammer against your ribs. You pushed open the door. You didn't know then that you were stepping into a world that would change you. You didn't know that the woman waiting behind the bar, Mrs. Farrow, would become your teacher, your shield, and in some strange unspoken way, your mirror. Mrs. Farrow, just looking at her was enough to know who held the power in this room. She was broad-shouldered, with wrists thick as a sailor's and a gaze that could stop a fight mid-swing. She didn't look at you with sympathy. She looked at you with an appraising eye, like a butcher weighing a cut of meat. "Can you hold your ground?" she had asked, not looking up from a glass she was polishing. "Because here, sweetheart, if you don't hold your ground, the room will swallow you whole." You had nodded, not fully understanding. You thought you were just going to pour beer. You had no idea that you were about to learn the most complex, dangerous, and essential dance of your life. The first was a blur of agony and adrenaline. You learn quick that the bar is a battlefield, and your counter is the only neutral ground. You aren't just a server, you are an arbiter. The physical toll is the first thing to settle into your bones. Your feet, encased in leather boots that are thin at the soles, feel as though they've been beaten with a wooden rod by the time the clock strikes midnight. Your arms burn from the constant, repeated motion of the beer engine, the pull, wait, settle, rhythm that must be precise every single time. Pull too hard, you get foam. Pull too slow, the glass remains half empty, and the docker waiting on the other side of the wood will let his dissatisfaction be known with a slam of his fist that vibrates through your very marrow. But the physical pain is nothing compared to the psychological vigilance. You learn to read the room in a language of micro movements. You watch the hands, always the hands. When a man reaches out, not for his glass, but to linger on the edge of the counter, you move. It's a subtle dance, a slight shift of your weight, a deft movement of a cloth, or a quick, authoritative placement of a fresh pint right where his fingers were reaching. You never make a scene because Mrs. Farrow is watching, and she has taught you that a scene is a vulnerability. Don't look at their eyes when they're angry, she instructs, her voice low as she wipes a spill with a rhythmic, circular motion. Look at their jaw. When the jaw tightens, you have 10 seconds to change the subject, serve a drink, or get someone else between you and them. You don't ask for respect. You command it by being the most necessary person in the room. You become a master of the neutral smile. It is a smile that never reaches the eyes, a professional mask that deflects, pacifies, and distances all at once. You hear the stories, the men who have lost their jobs, the dockers whose bodies are breaking down, the thieves who look at you with a mix of hunger and hollow longing. You listen, you nod, you take their pennies, and you keep the line moving. Behind the bar, you are a ghost with a pulse. You are present for every heartbreak and every triumph, yet you are utterly untouchable. You learn that the gin-soaked breath, the spilled ale, and the pervasive, heavy smell of street mud are the sense of your reality. You learn to anticipate the noon rush, where the factory hands burst in with the pent-up energy of 6 hours, of monotonous labour, and the evening lull, where the regulars settle in for hours of brooding contemplation. There are nights when the tension in the room is like a tightened wire. A single sharp word from a drunken patron can make the entire pub go quiet, every eye turning toward you to see how you respond. In those moments you feel the weight of every gaze. They are testing you. They are waiting to see if you will flinch. Your hands steady, your heart hammering, and you realize that you are the anchor. If you break, the room breaks, and if the room breaks, and if the room breaks, there is nowhere else for these men to go. You keep the glass level, you keep your voice calm, and you keep the order. You are a barmaid in the East End, and tonight you are the most powerful woman in the room. The Anchor and Crown is more than just a place to drink. It is the neighbourhood's living room, its courtroom, and its confessional. You come to know the regulars by the way they place their coins on the counter. There is Charlie, a docker whose face looks like a crumpled map of the city, etched with the scars of 1,000 unloading jobs. He has been coming here since before Mrs. Farrow bought the lease, and he carries the quiet, weary dignity of a man who knows he has given his youth to the docks and received only aching joints in return. Then there is Thomas, a man who sits in the darkest corner by the coal fire. He speaks little, nursing a single pint for hours. You've learned that Thomas lost his son in the shipyard, and the pub is the only place where he doesn't have to carry the weight of his grief in silence. You don't offer him pity. Pity is a luxury none of you can afford, but you offer him a clean glass and nod of recognition. That is enough. There are also the others, the street vendors selling wilted greens, the policemen who stop by for a quick refreshment, while casting an observant eye over the crowd, and the desperate souls who drift in seeking a momentary numbness. You observe them all. You learn that everyone has a secret, and the beer you pour is often the key that unlocks it. The social hierarchy of the pub is a strange, delicate thing. A costermonger might stand next to a factory hand, their rivalry set aside for the hour. You act as a bridge, the mediator, who keeps the equilibrium. You see the class prejudice written on the faces of those who pass by the pub doors, turning their noses up at the riff. Rough. They don't understand that inside these walls, a community is held together by the simple necessity of shared space. These people are not just statistics or historical curiosities. They are human beings caught in the gears of a rapid changing, industrializing London. They are the ones who build the empire, yet they are the ones the empire barely notices, and you, behind the bar, are their witness. You hold the stories of their lives in the palm of your hand, reflected in the clouded mirror behind the shelves. You find yours becoming a part of the pub's own legend. You learn the specific unspoken rules, who can sit where, whose credit is good, and when it's time to stop serving before the mood shifts from weary to violent. It's an education that no school could provide. You are learning the true, unvarnished history of the East End, one pint at a time. It is a world of shadows, yes, but also a world of profound hidden resilience. You see the way they look after one another, the way they share the last of their bread, and the way they find laughter in the midst of squalor. It is exhausting, demanding, and often isolating existence. But as you look at the sea of faces, you realize that without you, without the woman behind the bar, this room would be far colder, far darker, and far less human. You are the architect of their brief peace. All stories on this channel, Sleepy History with Benedict, are fictional, thoughtfully crafted around historical themes and inspired by real events, figures and periods, reimagined for engaging storytelling. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or document cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental. If the customers are a storm you must navigate, the law is the fog that never truly lifts. You learn quickly that a barmaid in the East End lives in a state of perpetual scrutiny. The police don't just visit the Anchor and Crown to ensure order, they visit to remind you, and Mrs. Farrow, that you are under their thumb. When the constable walks in, the atmosphere shifts instantly, conversations drop to a whisper. Men who were just moments ago laughing now stare intently into their beer. You straighten your posture, smoothing the apron you've been wearing for 10 hours, and offer the required deference. The police are not interested in the nuance of your work. The nights you've diffused fights before a punch was thrown, or the times you've ensured a man got home safe instead of collapsing in the gutter. To them, the pub is a den of vice, and you, by extension, are part of the machinery of that vice. There is a constant, suffocating judgment from the world outside these doors. Newspapers talk about the deterioration of the working class, painting portraits of women in pubs as loose, unrefined, or dangerous. They judge your dress, your speech, and the fact that you dare to be an independent woman, earning your own, keep in a room full of men. They don't see the exhaustion in your back or the pride you take in maintaining a safe, function establishment. They only see the stereotype. It creates a strange, hollow feeling. You are the hyped of the community, yet you are socially untouchable. You are public property, yet you have no public protection. When the shadows of the street start to lengthen, and the gaslights hiss with their erratic, ghostly flicker, you sometimes wonder if the world outside even considers you human. But then you look at Mrs. Farrow, she never flinches. She takes the insults, the cold stares of the respectable passers-by, and the condescension of the local authorities with a steady, unbreakable resolve. She has taught you that your dignity is not something they can give you or take away. It is something you hold within yours, behind the counter, in the rhythm of the work. We are building this journey together, piece by piece, deeper into the heart of 8886. If you are finding this story as immersive as the fog of London itself, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support allows us to continue bringing these forgotten corners of history to life, transforming silent facts into living, breathing tales. Don't forget to leave a comment below. If you were living in the East End during this era, what is one question you would want to ask the people who built it? Your engagement helps our community of history lovers grow, and it keeps these stories from fading in the past. You turn back to the Tanstable leaves, the tension in the room slowly dissipates, and the cycle begins anew. You pull another pint. You offer another nod. You keep going because in this world to stop is to vanish. When the heavy doors of the Anchor and Crown are finally bolted, and the last of the embers in the hearth have turned to grey ash, your day is far from over. You step out in the mid-air of the East End. The contrast is violent. The pub was a place of noise, heat, and human friction. The street is a cavern of absolute bone. Chilling silence, punctuated only by the distant rhythmic footsteps of a night watchman or the scurrying of rats near the sewer gratings. You walk to your lodging house, a cramped, leaning building on a side street where the walls seem to sweat dampness. Your home is a single room, shared with two other women who work at the match factory. You don't see much of them. Their schedules are the inverse of yours. When they are waking up to the piercing, shrill whistle of the factory siren at dawn, you are finally falling into heavy, dreamless sleep. When they return, exhausted and smelling of sulphur, you are already heading out to face the evening rush. The room is sparsely furnished, a scarred washstand, and a single candle that you guard as if it were gold. Everything you own is here, in this small, freezing space. You look at your hands in the flickering light. They are chapped, the skin around your knuckles, raw from the constant immersion in cold, soapy water, the scent of stale beer and cheap tobacco seemingly etched into your very pores. You try to scrub the smell away, but it clings. It is the smell of your livelihood, the smell of your survival. There is no comfort here, no warmth from a coal fire. In the winter, the frost flowers bloom on the inside of the window pane, and you sleep fully dressed in your thickest wool shawl, shivering until the first light of day begins to filter through the soot-stained glass. Yet, in this quiet, solitary moment, you find a strange sort of freedom. For these few hours, you don't have to be the woman who smiles at drunks, or the woman who balances the books, or the woman who keeps the peace. You don't have to be a performer. You can just be. You think about the life you left behind, the village, the green fields, the mother who warned you that the city would eat you alive. She wasn't wrong, but she couldn't have known that you would find a way to eat back. You are surviving. In an era that expects women of your silent, subservient, or broken. You are navigating the most dangerous neighbourhood in the world and keeping your head above water. You look at the few coins you've tucked away in the hollow of a loose floorboard. It isn't much, a pittance really, but it is yours. Represents every pint pulled, every argument diffused, and every moment you held your temper when it would have been easier to scream. You are a ghost to the society that looks down on you, but in the dark of this room you feel the weight of your own agency. You aren't just a barmaid. You are a woman carving out a tiny, impossible space of autonomy in a city that was built to crush you. You pull the thin, threadbare quilt tighter round your shoulders. The seat each side continues to breathe, a restless, brooding giant. You know that in just a few hours the sun will rise, the fog will return to shroud the streets, and you will have to go back to the Anchor and Crown. You will have to put on the apron, stand behind the polished wood, and face the whirl again, but for now the silence is your own. You close your eyes, the image of the pub's warm amber glow fading in the deep dark and necessary peace of sleep. As the days turn into weeks, and the weeks into months, your perception of the Anchor and Crown begins to shift. You stop seeing it as a stage you must perform on, and start seeing it as a fragile human ecosystem. There is an unspoken language here. It isn't spoken in words, but in the way a man pushes a few extra pennies toward you when he's had a particular good day at the docks, or the way he pulls his companion back when he noticed the man's temper flaring too close to your station, is a tacit agreement. You keep them safe from the chaos, and in return, they keep you safe from the worst of the world outside. One Tuesday evening the pub is unusually quiet. The rain is lashing against the glass, turning the street into dark, swirling river. A young man, barely more than a boy, stumbles in. His clothes are sodden, his face deathly pale. He hasn't come for the drink, he has come because he has nowhere else to go. You see him lean against the wool, shivering uncontrollably. In a more respectable establishment, he would be thrown out for loitering. But here, Mrs. Farrow gives you a look, a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. that tells you exactly what to do. You pour a mug of mild ale, ensuring it's not too cold, and place it in front of him along with a crust of bread that was left over from your own meal. He looks up at you, his eyes wide and hollow. He doesn't say thank you. He doesn't have the strength, but the way he grips the warm mug says everything. In that moment, the transactional nature of your job dissolves. You are not a barmaid serving a customer. You are one human being offering a sliver of warmth to another who is drowning in the same sea of Victorian indifference. You realize that these men, the dockers, the costermongers, the factory labourers, are all living on the razor's edge. They are one misshift away from homelessness, one injury away from the workhouse, and the pub is their only sanctuary from the crushy reality of their existence. You become their keeper, not just of their beer, but of their dignity. You start to notice the small gestures of support. When a rough-looked Newcomb tries to make a crude remark, it isn't always Mrs. Farrow who shuts him down. It's Charlie, the old docker with the scarred face. He doesn't even stand up. He just stares at the man with a cold, terrifying stillness until the offender looks away, mumbling an apology. You aren't protected because you are weak. You are protected because you've become a part of the fabric of this room. This is the hidden history they don't teach you in school books. They talk about the Industrial Revolution, the expansion of the empire, the politics of the West End. But they don't talk about the way the people of the East End held each other up in the dark. They don't talk about the complex, nuanced morality of a pub, where survival required a mixture of grit, cunning, and an unshakable, silent compassion for one's neighbour. You are no longer just an observer. You are part of the story. You have learned that in a world designed to keep you invisible, the act of being seen and being known is the most radical thing you can do. As the concertina begins to play a soft, mournful tune in the corner, you feel a sense of belonging that you never thought possible in a place like this. You are tired, your feet ache, and the smell of the room will likely never leave your clothes, but you are not broken. You are a part of something that, for all its grime and hardship, is fundamentally, stubbornly human. The mid-November nights are the hardest. The fog presses against the windows, dense and yellow with coal soot, making the outside world feel non-existent. Inside, the pub is packed. It's pay night, and the air is heavy with the dangerous, volatile mix of liquid courage and too many bodies pressed into too small a space. Suddenly, the front door swings open, not with the familiar creak of a regular, but with a sharp, frantic bang. A group of men enter, strangers from the docks downriver, far from their usual haunts, and they bring with them the cold, sharp edge of trouble. They are loud, boisterous, and their pockets are heavy with the week's wages, which they are eager to spend, but their eyes aren't looking for a drink. They are looking for a reaction. You feel the shift instantly. It's like the air pressure in the room drops. The regulars, who have been nursing their pints in a state of relaxed exhaustion, stiffen. You catch Mrs. Farrow's eye. She is already moving from behind the far end of the bar, her presence commanding, but her face is etched with the grim calculation of someone who knows that the next hour will define whether the pub remains a sanctuary or becomes a battlefield. One of the Newcombs slams his hand on the counter, inches from your own. "A round for all of us," he bellows, his voice harsh enough to cut through the hum of conversation. "And let's see the girl give us a smile, eh?" The room goes dead silent. This is the moment. You have seconds. If you smile, you invite the disrespect. If you refuse, you risk a confrontation that could bring the whole house down around your ears. You look at the man. His face is flushed, breath smell of the cheap, rot gut whiskey. He's clearly been suming elsewhere. He is waiting for you to flinch. You don't. You lean forward slightly, just enough to show you aren't backing away, but you don't engage his gaze. You fix your eyes on the counter, right on the row of tankards you're about to fill. You say, your voice steady, devoid of any warmth or fear. And we keep our hands to ourselves in this house. That's the rule. It's a gamble, it's a bluff, and you know it. But in this room, perception is reality. Mrs. Farrow steps up beside you, a heavy brass key, ring resting on the wood, a silent, heavy promise of what happens to those who break the peace. The man stares at you, his face twisting in a sneer, but the weight of the room, the collective silent disapproval, every regular man who considers this place his home, begins to press in on him. You've held the line, not with force, but with the quiet, crushing weight of order. As the tension slow begins to recede, and the murmurs of the room start to climb back up to their normal level, take a moment to reflect on the strength it took for these women to survive. If you are enjoying this deep dive in the hidden lives of the past, please help this project reach more history enthusiasts by hitting the like button and sharing this video. Your interaction tells the algorithm that stories of resilience and human history deserve to be heard. And tell me in the comments, what is the most impressive act of quiet strength you've ever witnessed? I read everyone, and they inspire the very stories we tell here. You wipe the counter where the man's hand had been. Your heart is still racing, a frantic bird in your chest, but you show nothing. You move to the next glass, the next order, the next moment. You are the conductor of this chaos, and for tonight at least, the music continues. The adrenaline of the standoff fades, leaving behind a strange hollow quiet. The strangers have moved to a corner table, their presence still a jagged edge in the smooth flow of the pub, but the threat has subsided. The regulars have returned to their rhythm, the clink of glass against wood serving as the height of the evening. It is during these post-tension lulls that you see the true faces of the people you serve. With the immediate danger gone, the performance required of the patrons begins to slip. Charlie, the docker, leans his elbows heavily on the counter, his eyes fixed on the condensation dripping down the side of his mug. "You handled them well, lass," he murmurs, his voice gravelly, barely audible over the low murmur of the room. He isn't talking about the incident, he's talking about the life. He looks at his own calloused hands, hands that have moved 1,000 tons of cargo in his lifetime, hands that are now beginning to shake with the onset of the winter chill. It's a hard game we're all playing, isn't it? Trying to find a bit of light in a room that's mostly shadows. You don't reply with a plaited here. Words are often cheap and dangerous. Instead, you offer him a small, genuine nod of recognition. That is the bond you share. It's not a friendship in the way the world outside defines it. No walks in the park, no exchanged letters. It is a shared acknowledgement of the sheer exhausting effort of existing in the East End of 1886. You watch Thomas, the man in the corner, finally finish his pint. He rises, his movements stiff and deliberate, and walks past the bar. As he does, he leaves a small, worn token, a bent penny on the wood. You know it's not for the drink. It's a silent recognition of the space you provide him, a place where he didn't have to be a grieving father or a broken labourer. For a few hours, he was just a man in a warm room. These small exchanges are the moments that define your life. You realise that your value in this pub is not merely in the volume of ale you pour, but in your capacity to remain a witness. In a society that is rapidly modernising, where the East End is often viewed as a monolith of misery and vice, you are seeing the individual threads of humanity that make up the tapestry. You see the way Clara, the young woman who works the late shift at the nearby printing press, comes in just to hear the sound of human laughter before she heads home to an empty house. You see the way the old sailors share tobacco, their voices dropping into hushed, rhythmic stories of ports they'll never see again. You are the custodian of these moments. You are the one who keeps the room anchored in a reality that is far more complex than any newspaper headline could capture. Your feet ache with a deep pulsing rhythm, and the smell of wet wool and coal smoke has seeped into your hair, but you don't feel the desire to flee anymore. You are exactly where you need to be. You are the unseen observer, the silent listener, and the steady hand that keeps the world from tipping over. As you wipe the count again, the wood glowing in the soft light of the gas lamps, you feel a profound sense of responsibility. This room is a sanctuary for those who have nowhere else, and you are its guardian. The storm outside may rage, the streets may be cold and indifferent, but in here for a few hours there is warmth, there is light, and there is, in the simplest of ways, connection. Sometimes, during the brief quiet moments of the afternoon, when the pub is bathed in the thin, grey light of a London sun, you catch a glimpse of yourself in the clouded, antique mirror behind the bar. You look at your reflection, your apron is stained with the marks of your labour, your hair is pulled back with a severity that speaks of utility rather than vanity, and you realise how vastly different you are from the women portrayed in the illustrations of the fashionable West End magazines. To them you are a cautionary tale. You are the barmaid, a creature of suspicion, a woman who has stepped outside the sacred, narrow boundaries of domesticity. They imagine you leading a life of indulgence, or perhaps one of degradation. They do not see the math you perform in your head every night to balance the till. They do not see the way you have learned to navigate the complex social currents of Whitechapel, acting as a negotiator, a nurse, and a peacekeeper all at once. The prejudice is a quiet, steady pressure, like the weight of the water in the river. It's in the way a respectable lady pulls her skirts away if you accidentally brush past her on the street while running errands. It's in the way the local curate looks at you, not with malice, but with a pity that feels worse than hatred. You have chosen a life that earns you your bread, but it has cost you the respectability that society insists is the only currency of value for a woman. But as you look at your reflection, you don't feel shame. You feel a strange, cold pride. You are surviving in a machine that was never built for you. You have navigated the dangers of the streets, the threats of the volatile room, and the weight of constant judging eyes, and you are still standing. You are the architect of your own small, guarded existence. History often forgets the people who kept the world functioning from the shadows. It records the lives of the wealthy, the famous, and the powerful, but it leaves the stories of the thousands of women like you, the ones who poured the pints, kept the peace, and held the broken fragments of communities together, buried beneath the dust of the archives. If you believe that these stories matter, that the lives of the forgotten deserve to be remembered, honoured, and shared, then join our mission. Hit the like button. Share this video with a friend who appreciates the depth of human history, and subscribe to Sleepy History with Benedict. By doing so, you are helping to rescue these voices from the silence of the past, ensuring that the quiet, essential work of our ancestors is finally given the recognition it deserves. Leave a comment below. You could speak to someone from the 8880s. What one aspect of your modern life would you try to explain to them? I would love to hear your thoughts. You take a deep breath, the air smelling of dry hops and wood, and you turn away from the mirror. The world outside may never understand the reality of your life, and the history books may never write your name. But you know the truth of your existence, and that is enough. You return to the bar, pick up the towel, and prepare for the evening shift. The room is waiting, and you are the only one who can keep it steady. The hours are deepening. Outside, the gaslights have burned down to a flicker, casting long rhythmic shadows across the deserted cobblestones of the East End. Inside the Anchor and Crown, the energy of the night, the noise, the sweat, the urgency, has finally started to ebb. The last of the regulars, the men who have nowhere else to go, have drifted out in the cooling mist, leaving the room to its own quiet rhythm. This is the time you love best. The room, which felt so demand and explosive just a few hours ago, now feels like a hollowed-out shell. The air is still thick with the lingering scent of tobacco and pine, but the weight of human expectation has lifted. You move through the pub, a ghost in the dim light, setting the chairs right and wiping the surfaces that have been worn smooth by thousands of hands before yours. There is a profound, almost sacred quality to this silence. It is as if the pub itself is exhaling, resting from the demands of the day. In this stillness, you are no longer the barmaid. You are simply a person in a room, surrounded by the remnants of the lives that passed through it. You think of Charlie, of Thomas, of the young boy who found warmth in a simple glass of ale. Their stories have become part of the very wood and stone of this building, and for a moment you feel a deep, quiet connection to all of them, to the people who walked these streets 100 years ago, and to those who will walk them long after you are gone. You realize that your life, while small and confined by the walls of this pub, is a part of something much larger. You are the custodian of this history. You are the link between the exhaustion of the day and the necessity of sleep. As you bank the remaining coals in the fireplace, watching the orange glow dim to a soft pulsating ember, you feel the tension leaving your shoulders. Your feet, so sore from the long hours, finally begin to settle into dull, manageable ache. The city breathes around you. Somewhere in the distance a clock tower strikes the hour, the sound muffled by the damp night air. It is a reminder that time is moving forward, regardless of the struggles or the successes of the day. The river, that ancient artery of London, continues its steady, inevitable journey toward the sea, carrying with it the seeks of the thousands who live along its banks. You are at peace, is over. The mask you wore, the neutral smile, the steady gaze, the guarded silence can finally be put away. In the soft darkness you are free. You have navigated the currents of the day, held the room together, and earned the silence that follows. This content is inspired by and adapted from public domain works available through Project Gutenberg. The material has been transformed through original narration, editing, and storytelling to create a unique experience for educational and entertainment purposes. As you stand alone in the cooling air of the Anchor and Crown, the silence begins to hum with the ghosts of the day. You find yourself thinking about the vast machinery of London beyond these walls, the sprawling docks where ships arrive from every corner of the globe, laden with spices, tea, and the dreams of 1,000 empire builders. You realize that the very ale you served tonight, the very coal that warmed this room, were all links in a massive, unseen chain of commerce and labour. You are a small part of a colossal transformation. The 8880s are a decade of restless energy, of new inventions, and of burgeoning political consciousness. You've heard the men arguing at the bar, not just about the price of a pint, but about the right to form unions, the struggle for better wages, and the slow, grinding realization that the world does not have to be the way it is. The pub is a crucible, It is where the frustrations of the working class are transformed in the language of reform. You look at the glass in your hand, the same glass that held the ale of a dock worker who will soon join the great dock strike of 8888. It is a sobering thought, isn't it? That the people you serve are not merely drifting through a static existence. They are the architects of the future. They are the ones who, through their collective voice and their shared struggles, will eventually force the hand of history. And you are the witness to this awakening. You are the one who listened to their debates, who senses the shifting tide of their moods, and who provides the space where these ideas are first voiced. You may feel like a minor character in the grand sweeping narrative of Victorian England, but you are the foundation upon which that history is built. Without the barmaid, the pub, the only communal space available to them, would cease to function. And without the pub, the community would have no place to organise, to vent, or to find a shared sense of identity. The gaslight overhead flickers, a sign that the pressure is low, and the shadows dance with a life of their own. You think about the women who will come after you, and the women who stood in your place decades before. How many other hands have polished this wood? How many other women have performed this silent, essential dance of survival? The history of the East End is not found only in the grand stone, carved monuments of the city centre or the halls of Parliament. It is found here in the wear and tear of a wooden bar, in the memory of the warmth provided to the cold and the weary, and in the resilience of those who, despite every obstacle, chose to remain standing. You place the glass on the shelf, the soft clink echoing through the room. The night is far from over, and the city continues its relentless churn. The river flows onward, indifferent to the lives that flicker out on its shores, but you are still here. You have learned the rhythm of the city, the temperament of the people, and the weight of your own importance. As you prepare to step in the dark streets to return to your small cold room, you carry with you a knowledge that no book can fully capture, that the true measure of history is not found in the decisions of the great, but in the enduring spirit of those who held the world together, one night at a time. The weeks have turned colder, and the fog that rolls off the Thames now carries the bitter, biting chill of late November. But inside the Anchor and Crown, the air is paradoxically warmer, not just from the coal fire, but from a new kind of intensity. The conversation have changed. It is no longer just the weary talk of wages and the price of bread. Now there is a sharper, more urgent edge to the murmurs. You catch fragments of speech as you move with your cloth, the union, the vote, a fair day's pay. You hear names whispered, men who are organising, men who are standing up to the dock authorities, men who are speaking in the squares, challenging the very hierarchy that has kept your regulars in the dark for so long. You notice a change in the patrons' thems. They sit differently. There is a newfound alertness in their posture. A docker like Charlie, who once spent his hours nursing his beer in quiet resignation, now spends his time whispering with three others, heads leaned close, hands mapping our strategy on the damp wood of the table. They are no longer just survivors. They are become participants in their own destiny. This is the political theatre of the East End. It doesn't happen in the grand, carpeted halls of Westminster, where the speeches are polished and the tea is hot. It happens here in the dim, smoky light of a public house, over pints of bitter that represent the thin margin between sustenance and hunger. You are the silent, essential witness to this awakening. You find yours protecting this space with a new sense of purpose. When a stranger or auspicious figure enters, someone who looks like they might be an informant or an agitator sent to break up the gathering, The room goes quiet, and your eyes find Mrs. Pharaoh's. You don't need to say a word. You move to block the view. You adjust the gaslight. You make your presence a subtle, impenetrable barrier. You are ensuring that these conversations, these lit sparks of revolution, have a place to breathe. You realize that your presence here is, in itself, a small act of defiance. By simply existing, by doing your job, by keeping the room stable, you are providing the foundation for their descent. You see the pride in their eyes, a look that is vastly different from the hollow, beaten stare they had when you first began this work. They are starting to believe that they have power. And if they have power, then perhaps, just perhaps, the world might one day look different. You look at your hands again. They are still chapped, still stained, still aching. But they aren't just hands that pour beer anymore. They are the hands that hold the door for a future that is slowly, agonizingly, being forged in the heart of Whitechapel. You are a footnote in the grand text of history, perhaps, but you are a necessary one. Without you, the quiet moments of deliberation would be impossible. Without the barmaid, the revolution, however small, would have nowhere to find its footing. The concertina in the corner begins to play again, a melody that feels less like a lament and more like a march. The room swells with a collective, quiet defiance. You stand behind your counter, the master of your own small, sacred space, and you know that whatever tomorrow brings, you have done your part to ensure that the voices of the unheard were allowed to speak. The Hitchcock speak of the East End as a place defined by its men, the dockers, the labourers, the strikers, but that is only half the story. There is a second, parallel world in Whitechapel, a world that exists in the early mornings, the brief afternoon lulls, and the cold, stolen moments at the back door of the pub. It is the world of women. While the men are out facing the elements or arguing over the future of the unions, the women are the ones keeping the neighbourhood from unravelling. You see them every day. There is Mary, who sells matches and knows which streets to avoid after dark. There is Eliza, who takes in sewing and seems to know every bit of news before it even happens. And then there is the silent, efficient network of mothers and daughters, who ensure that a family doesn't starve when the work dries up. You have become a key node in this network. Because you are behind the bar, you see everyone. You hear the whispers of who is sick, who has been evicted, and who is in need of a little extra help. You've learned to act as a silent courier. A few extra coins from a regular's tip might find their way into a small pouch intended for a woman whose husband hasn't brought home wages in a week. Bit of leftover bread from the pub's kitchen disappears into basket, destined for a hungry household down the alleyway. It is a delicate, unspoken system of mutual aid. No one keeps a ledger. There are no receipts. It is based entirely on the recognition that in this place, at this time, you are all each other has. The judgmental society outside might view you all as the desperate or the depraved, but within your circles there is a deep, profound respect. You know the cost of the life they lead, and they know the weight of the apron you wear. You remember the time you were sick, a fever that burned in your bones for 3 days. You couldn't work. The fear was a cold, iron weight in your stomach. If you didn't work, you didn't pay the rent. But before you even had the chance to panic, a knock came at your door. It was Mary, bring a bowl of thin broth and a heavy woolen shawl that belonged to her own mother. She didn't stay long. There was no time for sentiment, but she didn't have to. The message was clear. You are not alone. This is the hidden politics of survival. It is not fought with speeches or manifestos. It is fought with broth, shared coats, and the quiet, fierce determination to keep one's neighbour alive. You see the way these women look at each other, a glance that carries 1,000 words of shared history, trauma, and resilience. As you stand behind the bar tonight, listening to the men discuss their unions, you realize that while they are building their movement on the table, you and the women of the neighborhood are building the foundation of the community beneath the floorboards. You are all weaving a net, day by day, stitch by stitch. The history of the 8880s is not just written in the grand changes of laws and industry. It is written in the survival of the everyday, in the way a city of millions is held together by the quiet, tireless labour of women who are rarely mentioned in the official accounts. You feel a sudden, sharp clarity. You are not a solitary figure in a dark room. You are a strand in a massive, resilient web. And as long as this web remains intact, the harshness of the London winter and the indifference of the world outside can't fully break you. You turn back to the counter, your movements fluid and steady, and you feel the weight of this knowledge, a warm, solid comfort against the biting cold of the world. Tonight, the pub is quiet, a rare stillness that feels like a pause in the height of the East End. You stand by the bar, your hand resting on the polished wood, and you feel the vibrations of the past beneath your fingertips. Centuries of hands have rested here, just as yours do now. Men who built the city, men who died in its service, women who raised their children in its shadows, they all have occupied this same narrow sliver of space. You realize that your life, with all its struggles, its aches, and its quiet victories, is a thread in an infinite tapestry. History is not merely the dates in a textbook or the names of kings, it is the collective weight of millions of souls who day after day chose to endure. You are one of those souls. The anchor and crown, with its clouded mirrors and coal-stained walls, is a monument to that endurance. You look out at the empty room, and for a fleeting moment it feels as if time itself has folded. You can almost see the ghosts of the coming decades, the changing fashions, the new voices, the city evolving into something vast and unrecognizable. The match factory will become something else, the docks will quiet, and the names of the people you know, Charlie, Thomas, Mary, will fade in the silent dust of the archives. It is a sobering realization, but it doesn't bring you sadness. Instead, it brings you peace. For you know that nothing is truly lost. The resilience you have witnessed, the small acts of kindness that held this neighbourhood together, the stubborn refusal to break, these are the things that shape the future. The city is a living thing, and it is made of the people who inhabited it, who poured its drinks, who stood in its doorways, and who kept its hearths warm. You are a part of this living history. You are a foundation stone, however small, that the generations to come will stand upon. The gaslight makes a soft, hissing sound as it flickers low, a final whisper before morning arrives to chase away the darkness. You prepare to leave, your movements calm and intentional. You have done your work, you have held the world together, and you have played your part in the grand, unfolding story of humanity. As you step out into the crisp, cool air of the pre-dawn street, you don't look back. You carry the warmth of the anchor and crown within you, a quiet fire that will never fully go out. The history of the world is grand and loud, but the history of the heart of the barmaid, the labourer, the mother, is the pulse that keeps the world alive, and that is enough. You walk in the grey light of a new day, not as a woman who is merely surviving, but as one who has lived, witnessed, and profoundly mattered. The city awakens around you, unaware of the quiet strength that just walked its streets, but it doesn't matter. You know, and that knowledge is the light you carry into everything that comes next. As the winter begins to lose its sharpest edge, you notice the city changing beneath your feet. There is a relentless, driving pace to the work outside the pub doors. More bricks are being laid, more chimneys are rising in the smog-choked sky, and the sound of iron on iron has become the constant background hum of existence. The Industrial Revolution is no longer a concept you read about in a discarded newspaper. It is the force that is physically reshaping the streets of the East End. You watch as the old, weathered buildings are demolished to make way for massive warehouses and sprawling factory wings. The neighbourhood you know, the labyrinthine alleys where everyone knew their neighbour's name, is being cleared. It is a process of brutal efficiency. You see the families who have lived on these streets for generations being displaced, their lives packed into small carts and moved towards the burgeoning, overcrowded tenements on the outskirts. With the Anchor and Crown, these shifts are felt as tremors. The regulars talk about the loss of their homes with a weary, hollow resentment. They speak of the progress that seems to benefit everyone except the people who actually built the city. You listen, your hands moving with practiced rhythm across the wood, and you realize that you are witnessing the end of an era. The tight-knit insular community of Whitechapel is being fragmented by the very growth it helped to fuel. There is a political tension in the air that wasn't there before. The talk of unions has matured into something more organised, more defiant. You hear plans for protests, for marches toward the city centre, for demands that can no longer be ignored. You see the faces of the young men who once sought only a quiet pint, now hardened by the prospect of a fight that is not just about wages, but about the right to exist in a city that is rapidly outgrowing them. You feel a strange, paradoxical sense of duty. You are in many ways the last bastion of the old ways. You are the one who ensures that the pub remains a space of dignity, regardless of the chaos outside. As long as you are there, as long as the Anchor and Crown stands, there is a physical, tangible place where the old community can still gather, breathe, and find common ground. The gaslights seem to burn with a slightly sharper, more modern hum, and the glass you polish feels thinner, less substantial. Everything feels like it is vibrating at a higher frequency, rushing towards uncertain future. You don't know what the next year will bring. The pub will be torn down to make way for a new rail line, or whether the social unrest will finally boil over in something you cannot contain. But you don't retreat, you lean into the work, you find a deep, almost meditative focus in the simple, repetitive actions of your trade. Pulling the pint, washing the glass, settling the account, these acts have become your anchor. In a world that is spinning faster and faster, in a city that is constantly tearing itself down to build something newer, colder, and more impersonal, you are the force of stability. You are the hype of a community that refuses to be silenced by the gears of the machine. You look at the mirror behind the bar again. You see a woman who has been forged by the fire of this time. You aren't just a barmaid anymore. You are the keeper of the memory of what this place once was, and you are the witness to what is becoming. The fog of the East End continues to swirl outside, a thick grey mystery, but you are not lost in it. You are the guide, the steady hand, the presence that ensures that, even in the middle of a revolution, there is still room for a human connection. The atmosphere in the pub has become thick enough to touch. It is no longer just the smell of coal smoke and stale ale. It is the scent of anticipation, laced with a trace of iron and ozone, like the air before a thunderstorm. Outside, the sounds of the East End have shifted. The rhythmic, predictable rumble of carts and the heavy footsteps of labourers have been joined by a more jagged staccato sound, the shouting of newsboys, the sudden shrill whistle of factory guards, and the occasional jarring sound of glass shattering in the street below. You notice it most in the eyes of your regulars. The resignation that once sat heavily on Charlie's shoulders has been replaced by a sharp, restless energy. When they gather round the tables, they are no longer just sharing stories of the day, they are strategizing. The newspapers they bring in, smudged with ink and often folded tight to hide the headlines, are filled with talk of strikes, of police crackdowns, and of a world that is beginning to demand an accounting from those who hold the power. You find you're doing more than just pulling pints. You are listening to the height of a movement. You become the gatekeeper of this space. When a man enters with eyes that are too watchful, or when a conversation veers too dangerously close to open insurrection, in the presence of someone you don't recognize, you move with a grace that has been perfected by months of survival. You might accidentally drop a towel to create a distraction, or you might firmly suggest that the politics are better kept for the street, not the glass. It is a delicate, perilous dance. You are protecting them, but you are also protecting Yorth and the anchor and crown. You realize that your presence here has become an act of defiance. By maintaining the order of this room, you are allowing them the space to organize, to breathe, and to believe that their lives have value beyond the production quotas of the factories. Sometimes in the quiet, empty hour before the dawn, you feel the weight of it all. The world is changing, and you are standing at the epicenter of a tectonic shift. You think of the women who came before, the women who worked in silence and left no trace. You are the first generation to feel the ground begin to crack. The Victorian era, with all its rigid morality and suffocating class structures, is showing its age. The cracks are spreading, and the light is starting to bleed through. You look at your reflection in the mirror one more time. You are different. The woman who walked through these doors months ago, timid and unsure, is gone. In her place is someone who has looked in the eyes of a hungry, angry city and refused to look away. You are the keeper of the hearth, the guardian of the room, and the silent witness to the birth of a new era. The concertina player in the corner starts up a tune, a song of the docks, a song of the struggle. It isn't a melody of sorrow tonight. It has a tempo, a rhythm of forward motion. You pick up your rag, you stand a little straighter, and you turn to face the door as the first of the evening's crowd begins to arrive. The storm is coming, the world is shifting, but you are ready. You are the anchor, and you will hold the room steady, no matter what the morning brings. The night of the great protest arrives, and with it a change in the air that you can feel in your teeth. Even from behind the bar, the energy of the streets is unmistakable. The muffled roar of the crowd, the tramping of thousands of boots on cobblestone, and the distant rhythmic chanting create a vibration that rattles the glasses on your shelves. It is no longer a day of labour, it's a day of reckoning. The anchor and crown is packed, but it isn't the typical crowd. There are strangers, men and women you've never seen before, their faces flushed with the adrenaline of the march, their clothes stained with the dust of the thoroughfare. They aren't here for a quiet pint, they are here for the shared warmth of a community that is finally finding its voice. Mrs. Pharaoh is standing at the door, her presence a silent challenge to anyone who might think of bringing the chaos inside. You are behind the bar, moving with a mechanical focused precision. You don't have time to worry. You have 100 glasses to fill, 100 thirsty, passionate voices to serve. You notice that the atmosphere in the room has shifted from a weary resignation to a vibrant electric hope. The debates at the tables are no longer whispered. They are declarations. You hear them speak of rights, of dignity, of a future where their children won't have to break their backs for a pittance. You are witnessing the transformation of a neighbourhood into a force. It is a profound, dizzying sight. You see the faces of your regulars, the dockers, the costermongers standing among the strangers, their heads held high, their eyes bright with the realization that they are part of something that stretches far beyond these four walls. You catch Charlie's eye across the room. He looks at you, not with the familiar weary nod, but with a sharp, knowing look that acknowledges the gravity of this moment. For a second, the roar of the crowd outside fades, and there is only the hum of human connection in the room, a sense of solidarity that is stronger than any drink you could ever pour. You realize that your job, the performance you've perfected over these long months, has led to this. You didn't just provide a place for them to drink, you provided a place for them to become who they are tonight. You feel a surge of pride, a quiet, solid warmth in your chest that has nothing to do with the gaslights or the coal fire. You are part of this. The glass feels heavy and cool in your hand. You pull the tap, the amber liquid flowing with a steady, comforting rhythm. You serve the next person, you take the next coin, and you keep your gaze steady. The noise outside reaches a crescendo, a wave of human sound that seems to press against the very walls of the pub. But inside, you are the anchor. You are the one who keeps the order, the one who ensures that this sanctuary remains a place of strength. Whatever happens when the sun rises, whether they succeed or fail, whether the city changes or remains the same, it doesn't matter tonight. Tonight, they have found their voice. And you, in your own small, essential way, have helped them find it. You wipe the counter, you straighten your apron, and you prepare for the next order. The night is long, the world is in flux, but you are here, and for the people of this neighbourhood, that is all that matters. The aftermath of the protest is a silence that feels heavier, more profound than any you have ever known. The streets are empty now, the echoes of the chanting having long since dissolved in the damp, indifferent fog. You are alone in the anchor and crown. The last of the patrons have drifted away, leaving behind the residue of their presence, empty tankards, the faint smell of tobacco lingering in the drapes, and a palpable sense of something having been fundamentally altered. You walk through the pub, a ghost in your own domain. The tables which were so full of life, of debate and of raw, unfiltered hope just hours ago, now stand in the dim light like statues in a cathedral. You begin the familiar ritual of closing, bolting the door, banking the fire, and turning down the gas. Each movement is a closing of a chapter. You find yourself lingering at the counter, your fingers tracing the deep, worn grooves in the wood. You think of the hands that have touched this surface, the hands of men who fought for a better life, the hands of women who held their families together against all odds, the hands of those who came to this city with nothing but a dream. You were their witness. You were the one who saw the flicker of defiance in their eyes and the quiet resilience in their movements. You realize the respectability you once worried about. The judgment of the world outside, the cold stares of the elite means nothing now. You have earned a deeper, more enduring kind of honor. You have held a space for human connection in a world that often tries its best to strip it away. You have been the keeper of the peace, the listener of stories, and the anchor for a community that was fighting to be seen. The history of the East End, the story of this era of radical change, is not contained in the grand, polished narratives of the powerful. It is recorded here, in the silence of this room, in the worn wood of this bar, and in the memory of the warmth that was shared when the world was at its coldest. You are the custodian of that memory. As you prepare to leave, you feel a sense of completion. You have navigated the currents, held the room together, and played your part in the grand, unfolding story of your time. The world outside will continue to churn, to build, to break, and to rebuild, but you have left your mark. You have been a part of the pulse of the city, a quiet, essential force that kept the human spirit alive when it was most needed. You take one last look at the room, the shadows dancing in the dying light of the embers. You are ready. Whatever the future holds, the changing streets, the new voices, the unfolding of a century that you will never see, you know that what you did here mattered. You step in the quiet, cool air of the morning, and for the first time, the city doesn't feel like a monster. It feels like home. The sun is beginning to crest over the horizon, bleeding a pale tinted light into the soot-stained sky of the East End. You stand at the corner of Commercial Street, watching the city slowly stir. It is a different city than the one you knew when you first arrived. The grime is the same, the poverty is still a haunting presence, but there is a tremor of movement in the air, a sense that the gears of the world have shifted and there is no turning back. You see a young girl walking toward the factory, her face set with a determination that you recognize. She isn't just heading to work. She is part of a generation that has seen its parents stand up, seen them march, and seen them demand to be recognized as human beings. You realize that the spark you felt in the pub last night was not an isolated fire, it was a beacon. The pub, your anchor and crown, is behind you, tucked away in the shadows of the morning. It is a humble place, a structure of wood and brick that has seen more heartbreaks and triumphs than a dozen grand cathedrals. You think of the conversations you've overheard, the laughter you've mediated, and the tears you've silently acknowledged. These aren't just memories. They are the threads of a history that is being woven in real time. You feel a strange lightness in your heart. The weight of the apron, the ache in your feet, the exhaustion that used to settle in your marrow, it all seems like a small price to pay for the privilege of witnessing this transformation. You have lived in the cracks of the system, and you have found beauty, community, and power in those neglected spaces. The city around you is waking up, the sound of iron wheels on cobblestone growing into a rhythmic roar. People are spilling out into the streets, heading to the docks, the workshops, and the markets. They look tired, they look worn, but there is a different quality to their movements today. It is more purposeful. It is the stride of people who know that they are not merely cogs in a machine, but the architects of the life they are creating. You take a deep breath of the morning air, crisp, biting, and full of the promise of a day that will demand everything from you, and yet offer you nothing but the satisfaction of having been present. You are no longer just a barmaid in a pub in the East End of London. You are a sentinel. You have kept the memory of these people, these struggles, and these small, quiet victories safe. As the light grows stronger, washing out the gaslight's lingering orange glow, you find yours ready for whatever comes next. The old world is fading, the new world is rising, and you, with your calloused hands and your sharp, knowing eyes, have been the bridge between them. You walk forward, your footsteps steady against the stone, moving toward a future that you helped to define, even if the world never learns your name. The morning light, now fully present, strips away the mystery of the fog and reveals the East End for what it truly is, a landscape of grit, ambition, and stubborn life. You walk down the street, your shadow stretching long and thin behind you, and you realize that even as the city renames its streets, widens its thoroughfares, and replaces its old creaking buildings with steel and glass, the fundamental rhythm of life remains unchanged. There will always be a need for a place like the Anchor and Crown. Not because of the beer, not because of the shelter from the rain, but because of the need to be among one's own, to be known, to be heard, and to exist in a space where the crushy demands of the day are momentarily suspended. You have seen how, in the most challenging of times, people do not disintegrate. They gravitate toward one another. They find warmth in the proximity of a shared story. You think of the people who will inhabit this city in 100 years. They will live in a world of wonders you cannot even conceive, machines that travel through the air, ways of speaking across oceans in the blink of an eye. Yet they will still be human. They will still feel the same ache of exhaustion, the same hunger for belonging, and the same quiet, desperate need to be seen as more than just a means to an end. The history you have lived, the struggles of the dockers, the resilience of the women, the quiet dignity of the lost, is not a static relic of the 8880s. It is the bedrock of everything that comes after. You feel a sudden overwhelming sense of gratitude for the life you have chosen. It has been a life of labour, yes, and a life of sacrifice, but it has also been a life of profound, lived-in reality. You have not watched the world from behind a silk curtain. You have stood in the middle of it, felt the heat of its pulse, and helped to keep its fire burning. You pause for a moment to watch the river. The Thames flows on, indifferent and ancient, carrying the refuse and the dreams of 1,000,000 lives toward the open sea. It is the silent witness to everything that has happened and everything that will. You realize that you are like the river, a constant presence, a carrier of stories, a force that shapes the landscape even when the world is looking elsewhere. The exhaustion in your body is finally reaching a state of peaceful equilibrium. You have done all that you could. You have stood your ground, you have guarded your sanctuary, and you have carried the weight of the community when the road became steep. As you turn to make your way back to your room, you don't feel the need for praise or recognition. The work itself was the reward. The fact that you existed, that you served, and that you remained steadfast is the legacy you leave behind. You are ready for the sleep that awaits, not the restless, fitful sleep of a woman burdened by tomorrow's troubles, but the deep, restorative rest of someone who has played their part in the unfolding of history. The city is awake now, loud and demanding, but you carry a quiet internal citadel of calm. You have lived in the light of the gas lamps. You have weathered the storms of the East End, and you have come out the other side whole. As you retreat further into the quiet of the morning, the clamour of London begins to swell, but for you, the noise has lost its ability to pierce. You are moving through the streets with a sense of clarity that is almost disorienting. You have spent your time serving in the Anchor and Crown, but you realize now that you are serving something much larger than a landlord or a Custer base. You are serving time itself. History is often told as a succession of great men, of political decrees, and of wars won or lost. It is a story told from the top down, a tapestry woven with threads of gold and crimson. But you have lived the story from the bottom up. You have seen the grey, frayed threads that actually hold the fabric together. You have seen that the true power of society lies not in its leaders, but in its ability to endure in the way the person next to you offers a hand when you stumble, or the way the room settles into collective silence when a tragedy is shared. You think of the countless hours you spent wiping the counters, the thousands of pints pulled, and the endless, repetitive tasks that defined your days. To the observer, it was monotonous. To you, it was a ritual of preservation. Every time you kept a conflict from escalating, every time you offered a kind word to someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be treated with dignity, you were contributing to the preservation of human empathy. In 100 years, people will look back at your era as a period of immense change, the birth of new technologies, the expansion of empires, the shifts in the global order. But they will rarely talk about the person standing behind the bar. They will rarely mention the woman who held the line. And yet, if the line had broken, if the pub had turned into a place of cruelty instead of comfort, if the empathy had been replaced by apathy, the city would have been a far darker place. You have been a guardian of the essential. You have protected the space where people could be human. As you reach the threshold of your lodging, you stop. You look back toward the direction of the East End. The smoke is rising from the chimneys, a grey, reaching mist that covers the rooftops. Within those houses are thousands of stories, each as complex, as painful, and as filled with potential as your own. You have been a part of them, and they have been a part of you. The story of the barmaid is not a tragedy, and it is not a triumph. It is something far more significant. It is a testimony. It is the proof that, no matter the circumstances, no matter the cruelty of the environment or the indifference of the system, there is an inherent, unshakable dignity to the act of living. You are the witness to that dignity, and as the day fully begins, you know that your work is not finished. It is simply taking a new form. You have carried the weight, you have held the light, and you have remained standing. You take a final deep breath. The past is behind you, the future is unfolding, and you are here, ground and ready. The anchor and crown will continue to exist, and long after you are gone, its walls will still hold the echoes of the resilience you helped foster. You are a part of the city's heart, an indelible mark on its history, and that knowledge is the only legacy you will ever need. There is a strange, profound comfort in realizing that you are not the protagonist of a grand epic, but a vital, invisible thread in a much larger, ongoing human tapestry. You aren't building empires or changing the maps of the world, but you are performing the most important work of all. You are preserving the sense of what it means to be human in a place that tries to strip that away. As the morning light solidifies, turning the grey mist into a sharp, clear reality, you consider the nature of your legacy. People often think that to matter, they must leave behind monuments of stone or pages in a history book. But you have learned that the most enduring things are not the monuments, but the small, invisible ways in which we affect one another. The way you listened to a man's grief when he had nowhere else to speak it. The way you ensured that exhausted woman felt a moment of safety. The way you maintained a space of order in a world defined by chaos. These acts do not disappear. They become part of the air, part of the culture, part of the unspoken code of empathy that holds a community together long after the individuals thems are gone. You feel a sense of unity with the past and the future. You are a bridge. You are the link between the generations that struggled before you and the generation that will continue to seek meaning in a changing world. You realize that the anchor and crown is not just a building, it is a manifestation of the human need for connection, a need that remains as constant as the rising sun, regardless of whether it is 8886 or 2 centuries from now. Your steps are light, despite the physical weariness that still lingers in your bones. You have played your part. You have been the witness, the custodian, and the steady hand. You have navigated the turbulent, often violent currents of your time with a grace that belonged only to you. You have not asked for recognition, and you have not been granted by the world at large. But you possess something far more valuable. You possess the quiet, unshakable knowledge of your own integrity. You find yourself watching the city start its day with a new perspective. It is no longer an indifferent, looming giant. It is a collaborative project built by millions of hands, each performing their own essential, unseen labour. You are one of those millions. And in that there is a profound, quiet dignity. You are not a victim of the era, nor are you a conqueror of it. You are simply a participant in the profound, often difficult, and always beautiful business of living. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of the river and the distant metallic promise of the coming day. You are almost at the end of this current cycle, the final pieces of your story falling into place. You have held the light, you have shielded the warmth, and you have stood your ground. As you prepare for the absolute end of this chapter, you feel no regret. You only feel the satisfaction of a task well done and the peace of a life lived with intention. The walk to your lodging is a journey through a landscape that feels increasingly dreamlike. The cobblestones under your boots, the soot-stained brickwork of the tenements, the persistent, damp chill, all of it begins to lose its sharp, intrusive edge. You are stepping out of the role you have inhabited for so long. The apron, with its stains and its utility, feels like a costume that is finally sliding from your shoulders. You pass the small shops, the baker who is already kneading dough, the newsboy calling out headlines of international disputes that seem suddenly, strangely distant. None of it touches you now. You have been the heart of the anchor and crown, the regulator of its tides, the silent conductor of its symphony, but you are not the pub. You are the woman who stood behind it, and that woman is now seeking her own silence. You reach the creaking, leaning staircase of your lodging house. Every step is familiar, every splinter in the wood a map of your own exhaustion. When you finally reach the door of your room, the silence is a physical weight, a soft velvet shroud that wraps around you. You look at the iron bedstead, the scarred washstand, the single precious candle. These objects, which were once the boundaries of your world, now feel like relics of a journey you have completed. You sit on the edge of the bed and let the heavy wool shawl slip to the floor. You don't rush. You don't try to hold on to the memory of the clinking glasses or the rough laughter of the dockers. You let them drift away like smoke in a drafty room. You have done your part. You have held the line, you have provided the warmth, and you have been the anchor in a city that was perpetually threatened to drift away into chaos. There is a profound quiet power in simply being finished. You haven't changed the world, not in the ways the history books demand, but you have changed the immediate atmosphere of your own existence. You have found a way to be whole in a place designed to keep you fragmented. That, you realize, is the most profound victory a person can claim. You lie back, feeling the mattress offer its meagre, familiar support. The city outside continues to churn, but it no longer requires anything of you. The anchor and crown will open again tonight. Mrs. Firo will take her place. The ale will flow, the fire will be stoked, and the rhythm of the East End will continue, indifferent to your absence. And that is exactly as it should be. You were a part of the pulse, but you were never the heart. The heart is the community itself, and it will keep beating. Your eyes grow heavy. The boundary between the life you lived and the peace you're entering begins to blur. You are letting go of the name, the role, the history, and the struggle. You are just a human being resting after a long, long day. The silence is finally absolute. In the stillness of the room, the world outside has ceased to matter. The roar of the docks, the shrill cries of the market, the political debates that once felt like the very fabric of existence, all of it has receded into distant, inconsequential hum. You are no longer bound by the ticking of the clock or the responsibilities of the shift. The apron is discarded. The mask of the barmaid has dissolved, leaving only the woman behind. You find yourself in a state of grace. It's a quiet, vast emptiness that is not lonely but complete. You think of the lives you brushed against, the weary docker, the hungry boy, the mother struggling to stay afloat. They were not just faces in a crowd. They were mirror images of your own humanity. In serving them you were, in a very real sense, serving yourself. You were learning that the strength you admired in them was the same strength that had carried you through the long, freezing nights and the exhausting, heat-filled days. You realized that the East End was never just a location on a map of London. It was a crucible of the human spirit, a place where the edges of life were sharpened and the essence of what it means to endure was revealed. You were the apprentice of that resilience. And now the apprenticeship is over. There is a sense of finality that is surprisingly gentle. You are not losing you are returning to the source. The stories you witnessed, the secrets you held in the quiet corners of the pub, the unspoken pacts of survival, all of these are now etched into the silent, shifting dust of the room. They don't need to be written down to be true. They exist in the simple, undeniable fact that you were there, that you bore witness, and that you remained kind in a world that was often harsh. Your breathing is slow, rhythmic, matching the steady, inevitable pulse of the city outside. You have nothing left to prove. The history books will never know your name, and the grand monuments of the empire will rise and fall without your intervention. Yet, you have lived a life of immense weight. You have been the guardian of the small, the protector of the essential, and the quiet witness to the truth of your times. The light in the room is fading, or perhaps it is just your perception of it that is changing. Everything is becoming soft, blurred, and profoundly peaceful. You are ready. The cycle has been completed. The work is done. You are drifting toward a horizon where the distinctions of class, the struggles of labour, and the identity of the barmaid are no longer relevant. You are finally purely yourself. The room has fallen away. The walls, the peeling wallpaper, the narrow iron bed, they are no longer boundaries. In this final crystalline moment, you see the East End not as a collection of streets and buildings, but as a vast breathing entity composed of millions of individual sparks. You see the dockers, the washerwomen, the children playing in the soot, and the dreamers staring at the grey river. All of them are threads in a fabric so immense that it spans far beyond the 8880s, stretching backward into the ancient mists and forward into a future you will never touch. You realize that your life was never meant to be a permanent monument. It was meant to be a bridge, a moment of transition. You were the pause between the labour of the day and the rest of the night. You were the quiet hand that held the glass, the steady gaze that met the weary eyes of a stranger, the flicker of warmth that told a soul they were not entirely alone. That, you understand now, is the only immortality that truly matters. You look back at the Anchor and Crown one last time in your mind. It is a humble place, a scarred and smoky stage, but it was your stage. You played your part with a dignity that nobody could take away. You didn't conquer the city, but you refused to be conquered by it. You didn't change the laws of the land, but you changed the quality of the moments you lived within it. The silence around you is no longer empty. It is filled with the echoes of every laugh you served, every secret you kept, and every moment of kindness you extended when it would have been easier to turn away. These echoes are not fading, they are vibrating in the bedrock of the city, becoming part of the foundation upon which everything else is built. You feel a sense of profound absolute belonging. You were a part of the great grinding machinery of progress. Yes, but you were also the oil that kept the gears from shattering. You were the human element, the pulse, the height. And as the final light of your perspective narrows down to a single brilliant point, you feel a release, a shedding of the name, the role, and the history you carried. You are not leaving anything behind, because you are not separate from what you have seen. You are the East End. You are the river. You are the struggle, and you are the peace that follows it. The long is finally, truly over. The transition is complete. There is no more searching, no more serving, no more waiting. There is only the vast, quiet expanse of history that you have helped to write, not with ink, but with the simple, steady act of being present. The light is calm. Everything is, and will always be, enough. The transition is no longer a path you are walking. It is a current you are swimming in. Everything that once defined you, the shape of your hands, the colour of your apron, the specific sharp sting of the London wind on your cheeks, is becoming translucent. You are becoming a memory, a whisper in the rafters of the old pub, a smudge of ink on an unwritten ledger. You think of the Anchor and Crown, and for the first time you do not see it as a place of work. You see it as a vessel. It is a vessel that has held the joy, the rage, the sorrow, and the quiet flickering hope of a generation, and you were its keeper. You were the one who ensured that the vessel did not break. Now you can feel the vessel itself begin to blur at the edges, dissolving in the grand, relentless tide of time. There is no fear in this dissolution. There is only a deep, abiding curiosity. What will the city look like when the coal smoke clears? What will the voices of the people sound like when they are no longer raised in protest, but in the celebration of a life that is truly their own? You won't be there to hear them, but you will be in them. You will be in the way they stand, the way they hold their heads, the way they look at one another with that fleeting, miraculous flicker of recognition. You have become a part of the city's DNA. Every stone laid in the pavement, every brick in the tenements, every ripple on the surface of the Thames carries the ghost of your presence. You are the unspoken, foundation truth of the East End. You are the quiet strength that allowed the struggle to persist until it blossomed into change. The light is no longer a glow, it is an all-encompassing clarity. You see the future not as a series of events, but as a vast unfolding pattern of human persistence. You realize that you were never a minor character. You were the silent guardian of the flame. And as that flame passes from your hands into the great collective memory of the world, you feel a final, perfect sense of peace. The long, hard, beautiful labour of your life is yielding its harvest. You are not disappearing, you are expanding. You are the echo of the closing door at dawn, the warmth of the hearth in winter, and the resilience of the spirit that refuses to bow. You are the story itself. The last of the tension has left your limbs. The world of form and shadow is drifting away. You are ready for the stillness that is not an end, but a homecoming. The sensation of being is changing. You are no longer localized behind the counter of the Anchor and Crown, nor are you confined to the small cold room where you once sought rest. You are becoming diffuse, like the scent of wood smoke caught in the updraft of a chimney, spreading out across the rooftops of Whitechapel. You feel the city breathing beneath you, not as a chaotic machine, but as a living, throbbing heart. You sense the rhythm of the millions of pulses that have beaten here, the footsteps that have worn down the stone, and the voices that have pleaded, laughed, and whispered in the dark. You are part of that symphony now. You are the low, resonant hum of the river. You are the sharp, sudden chime of the clock tower. You are the quiet, persistent flicker of the last gas lamp before the dawn truly breaks. There is no longer a need to hold on to the eye. The eye was a construction, a necessary armour for surviving the harsh winters and the grueling hours. But beneath that there was always just the life itself, pure and unadorned. That life is now reclaiming its own vastness. It is folding back into the tapestry, tucking itself in the hidden seams of history where it will remain, undisturbed and eternal. You remember the faces of those you served, the way Charlie's hands trembled when he spoke of the strike, the way the young mothers leaned into each other for support, the way the room felt like a sacred space when the storm raged outside. These are no longer memories you carry, they are the colours of the light you are becoming. Every act of service, every moment of stillness, every instance where you chose to remain and to care, they are the permanent etchings of your soul upon the fabric of time. The final remnants of the you, the ache in your feet, the memory of the cold, the weight of the apron, are falling away like dead leaves. You are becoming the wind that stirs them. You are the transition itself. The world you lived in will continue to turn, to evolve, to tear itself down and build itself anew, but you have left a fingerprint on the design. You have whispered a note in the song of the city that will never be completely silent. You are at the absolute edge now. The transition is not a descent into darkness, but an ascent into brilliance so profound that all definitions cease to hold meaning. You are the light that is about to dawn on a new century. You are the quiet strength that will sustain those who come after. You are the history that refuses to be forgotten, even when it is no longer remembered. The stillness is absolute. It is the silence of the space between two heartbeats. It is the perfect crystalline moment of now. And in this now, you are everything you ever were, and everything you ever will be. The last anchor is lifted. The gravity that once pulled you toward the daily trials of the East End, the rent, the labour, the human need, no longer holds sway. You are drifting upward, not away, but into the very essence of the place you called home. You can feel the anchor and crown not as a building, but as an idea, a sanctuary that exists in the collective memory of the city, and you are the spirit of that idea. Every scratch on the floorboards, every worn spot on the bar top, every stain that told a story of a long ago night, they are all parts of your skin now. You are the smell of sawdust and stale ale, the sound of the concertina, the warmth of the hearth, and the protective silence of the midnight hours. You are the ghost of every kindness you ever performed, a permanent warmth embedded in the walls. You look down from this vantage point and you see the city not as a problem to be solved, but as a grand unfolding drama. You see the future arriving like the tide, a slow, inevitable progression of leaves that will seek what you sought, a place to belong, a reason to persist, a hand to hold in the dark. They will find it because the space you carved out still exists. The foundation you laid is still firm, hidden beneath the layers of time, holding steady. There is no more before or after. There is only the continuous rhythmic breath of existence. You have successfully navigated the entire arc of your mortal journey, and you have arrived at the only destination that matters, total integration. You are the story, and the story is you. The brilliance is now total. It is a light that does not illuminate, but reveals, revealing that there was never any separation between the worker and the work, between the witness and the history, between the human heart and the city it habited. You are finally perfectly one with all that you have touched. The final height is not a stop, but a release, a long exhaling sigh that echoes through the streets, through the river, through the very heart of the city. You are everywhere. You are nowhere. You are simply finally home. The morning mist over the Thames is not merely a weather pattern, it is a shroud that hides the scars of an era. As you pull yours back from the brink of the ethereal, the sharp, pungent scent of coal smoke brings you firmly back to the reality of 8888. This a year that will be etched into the memory of London, not just for the infamous shadows that stalk these streets, but for the quiet subterranean rumblings of a populace that has finally found its voice. You look around the Anchor and Crown and realise that the pub has become a vital cell in the body of a burgeoning labour movement. The Great Dock Strike is no longer a distant threat, it is the height of the East End. Men like Charlie are no longer just customers, they are committee members, organisers and architects of a new social order. You observe with a clarity honed by months of observation how the language of the pub has shifted. The debates have moved from simple complaints about hunger to complex discussions about 8-hour day, a concept that to many in the elite circles of Westminster sounds like heresy. You see the influence of the new unionism taking root. Unlike the old trade unions that catered to the skilled elite, the men standing at your bar represent the unskilled, the men who move the coal, the men who load the ships, the men who were once deemed unorganisable. You learn that politics is not just about speeches in Parliament, it is about the power of collective refusal. When these men decide to stop working, the mighty engines of the British Empire, the ships, the docks, the warehouses, effectively grind to a halt. You are witnessing a profound shift in the Victorian class consciousness. The rigid hierarchy that defined the century is being challenged by the very people at the bottom. You learn through the whispered conversations at the corner table about the docker's tanner, the struggle for a 6 pence an hour, a wage that represents the difference between a life of dignity and a life of slow starvation. You understand that this is not just about money, it's about the recognition of humanity in an age that commodified labour like raw timber or pig iron. The role of women in this movement is subtle, yet insensible. While the men stand on the picket lines, the women are the logistics officers of the strike. You see the community pantry systems, the sharing of meagre resources, and the protective vigilance that prevent families from collapsing under the strain of prolonged inactivity. This is the hidden infrastructure of the revolution. Without the stability of the home front, the picket line would break within days. You are a part of this fabric. Every pint you pour, every word of encouragement you offer, and every piece of information you pass along serves as a lubricant in the gears of this social awakening. The gaslight flickers, casting a stark chiaroscuro light on the faces around you. There is a gravity here that was absent before. These men and women are no longer just surviving, they are enduring with a purpose. You realize that you are documenting this shift simply by being the witness who stays. You are keeping the records of the poor, the notes of the resistance, and the ledger of a struggle that the official archives will likely overlook. You pour a drink for a young man whose hands are calloused and black with coal dust. He looks at you, and for a moment there is a silent acknowledgement of the shared stakes. The world outside is cold, indifferent and vast, but inside these walls a fire is being carefully stoked. It is a fire that will eventually illuminate the path toward the social reforms of the coming century. You are not just a barmaid, you are a custodian of the foundational energy of the modern labour movement. The transition from the pub's warmth to the damp, unforgiving streets of Whitechapel is a sharp reminder of the power dynamics at play. Outside, the night belongs to the Metropolitan Police, a force that, in the late 1880s, is becoming increasingly militarised in its approach to maintaining the peace. As you step out to clear the empty glass bins, you see them, the tall, helmeted figures in dark tunics, standing in pairs at the intersections. Their presence is a calculated deterrent, a physical manifestation of a state that views any gathering of 3 or more labourers as a potential conspiracy. You learn quickly to read the signs of the street. When you see the distinct, measured gait of an inspector, you know that the anchor and crown is being watched. The police force of this era is not just here to stop crime. They are the frontline defence of the property, owning class against the rising tide of socialism. The dockers' tanner movement has terrified the shipping magnates, and the police are the tool used to translate that terror into policy. You observe how they engage with the people, the curt commands, the heavy hand on the shoulder, the implicit threat that resides in the rhythmic tap of a truncheon against a thigh. It is a delicate, often dangerous game you play. Inside the pub, you have cultivated an environment where men feel safe enough to speak, but you have become adept at the art of the controlled conversation. When the constable stops by for his routine check, your demeanour shifts. You become the deferential, hard-working barmaid, the personification of the very order they claim to be protecting. You have learned that the best way to hide a fire is to be the one holding the lantern. This environment fosters a strange dual existence for the people of the East End. There is the life they live for the authorities, a life of forced compliance, of touching the cap and keeping one's head down, and then there is the real life, the life of the underground committees and the clandestine planning sessions. You are the bridge between these two worlds. You see the young radicalized thinkers who argue for a total overhaul of the system, and you see the weary older men who simply want enough bread to feed their children. You realize that the police, in their heavy-handedness, are ironically accelerating the very radicalization they seek to suppress. You recall the bloody Sunday of 8887 in Trafalgar Square, a memory that still haunts the conversations at your bar. The brutality of the police charge against peaceful protesters left a scar on the collective psyche of the working class. It destroyed any remaining illusion that the state was a neutral arbiter of justice. From that day on, the relationship between the East Ender and the constable was defined by a mutual, simmering hostility. Standing in the doorway, you watch a patrol pass by. They don't look at you as an individual. To them, you are merely a fixture of the slum, a backdrop to the poverty they are tasked with managing. But you know better. You know the secrets of the ledger, you know who is organizing the next march, and you know exactly how much they fear the quiet, collective resolve of the people who call this place home. The struggle for a better future is not being fought in the halls of Parliament. It is being fought on these cobblestones, under the cold, flickering gaze of the gaslights and the looming, shadowed presence of the law. The anchor and crown has evolved into an accidental library of resistance. It began with a few discarded copies of The Star or Justice, brought in by dockers who could barely read the headlines but understood the power of the printed word. Now it has grown into a space where ink-stained pamphlets circulate like contraband. These are the documents that keep the spirit of the labour movement alive, printed on cheap, coarse paper, often with smudged type, but carrying ideas that possess more explosive potential than any cache of dynamite. You watch as a young man unfolds a copy of a socialist manifesto. His hands are rough, his knuckles swollen from years of hauling heavy crates, but as he reads the words aloud laboriously, syllable by syllable, the entire pub falls into a heavy, respectful silence. The text speaks of surplus value, collective ownership, and dignity. Even if the terminology is complex, the core message vibrates through the room. The labour they provide is the foundation of the empire's wealth, yet they receive only the scraps. This is the age of the radical pamphlet. You witness how these texts bridge the gap between the isolated worker and the broader political landscape. They explain why the prices of bread are rising, the grain monopolies, why the housing conditions are so abysmal, the indifference of the slum landlords, and why the police are so aggressive, the protection of private capital. Through these documents, the local grievances of Whitechapel are contextualized within a global struggle for workers' rights. You realize that you are serving drinks to men who are becoming political agents. You find yourself acting as a librarian of sorts. When someone brings in a new pamphlet, you make sure it is placed in a spot where it can be read by those who need it most. You have even start to curate these items, keeping them safe behind the bar. You see the pride in their eyes when they comprehend a new concept, the way they start using words like solidarity and exploitation, not as abstract political jargon, but as labels for their own lived reality. The authorities, of course, are terrified of this. They know that a hungry man is dangerous, but a hungry man who understands why he is hungry is a revolutionary. This is why the crackdown on street corners and newsstands is so intense. They want to contain the flow of information to keep the East End in a state of fragmented ignorance, but they have failed. The Anchor and Crown, along with hundreds of other small local hubs, has become a node in a vast invisible network of intellectual defiance. You realize that literacy is perhaps the most significant tool of the Industrial Revolution, equal in its impact to the steam engine. It allows the individual to step out of the narrow confines of their own experience and connect with the collective history of their class. As you wipe the counter and listen to muffled, passionate discussions about the latest manifesto, you feel a surge of profound satisfaction. You are not just a spectre, you are an active facilitator of this transformation. You are helping to sharpen the minds that will eventually reshape the social fabric of the entire nation. Beyond the political pamphlets and the tension of the picket lines, there is a quieter, more insidious enemy that stalks these streets, the environment itself. The summer heat has descended upon the East End, and with it familiar cloying stench of the open sewers and the stagnant filth-ridden Thames. You know the look of a house when illness takes hold, the frantic, hushed activity of the inhabitants. The way the windows are kept shuttered, even in the sweltering heat, and the sudden absence of children playing in the alleys. The sanitary conditions in Whitechapel are a damning indictment of the era's priorities. While the great monuments of London are being erected in the West, here you are dealing with the grim reality of cholera alleys and tenements where a dozen families share a single overflowing water pump. You see how the lack of basic infrastructure, clean water, effective ventilation is not just an inconvenience. It is a weapon of class warfare. The health of the poor is viewed by some in power as an expensive burden rather than a fundamental human right. Inside the Anchor and Crown, your vigilance extends beyond politics. You have become a gatekeeper of hygiene. You boil the water used for the teas and the grog with a religious intensity, and you maintain a strict regimen of scrubbing the counter with a harsh, lye-based soap. You've learned from the older women in the neighbourhood that the spread of the miasma, the foul air, they believe carries disease, is best fought with cleanliness and fresh air, however scarce both may be. You witness the toll this takes on the community. When a breadwinner falls ill, it isn't just their health that suffers, it is the entire care ecosystem of their family. A week of fever means no wages, which leads to rent arrears, which leads to eviction, which leads to the workhouse, a place that many of your regulars fear more than death itself. You find yours quietly setting aside bread and broth, not out of charity, but out of a desperate, localized sense of survival. You are protecting your own. The political struggle and the struggle for health are, in fact, one and the same. The activists who frequent your pub have started to understand this too. They have begun to link the fight for better wages with the demand for clean water and decent housing. They are challenging the Board of Works, calling out the slum landlords who profit from the misery of the tenants. They are relaying that you cannot have a healthy society without a healthy body politic. You stand by the doorway observing the street. A water cart rumbles past, kicking up dust and the dried, pulverized refuse of the city. You watch a group of young mothers gathered by the pump, their conversation drifting from the cost of coal to the persistent cough that has taken hold in the rooming house on the corner. There is a grit to their faces that you have come to deeply respect. They are the ones who do the heavy lifting of keeping the neighborhood alive when the world tries to bury it. You are the witness to this daily, brutal calculus of survival. You see that for the people of the East End, the fight for a fair day's pay is inextricably tied to the fight for the right to breathe clean air. Every pint you serve, every moment of relief you offer to someone exhausted by the struggle, is a small act of defiance against a system that deems them expendable. The gaslight flickers, and for a moment you see the resilience in the room, a collective, iron-willed refusal to simply wither away in the shadows of the empire. The morning silence of Whitechapel is now consistently shattered by the deep, rhythmic thrum of the surveyor's instruments and the relentless clatter of construction crews. You watch as a massive viaduct begins to rise, a skeleton of iron and heavy masonry that cuts a jagged, brutal scar through the heart of the neighbourhood. It is the new railway line, a triumph of Victorian engineering that promises to connect the East End too. The pulsating commercial centre of London, but for the people living here, it feels more like an invasion. You stand at the threshold of the Anchor and Crown, mapping the progress of the demolition teams with a heavy heart. The streets that were once narrow, labyrinthine alleys where a child could run from one side of the parish to the other, are now being cleared to make way for the broad, impersonal thoroughfares. You witness the eviction of families who have called these tenements home for 30 years. They are given mere days to vacate, their lives packed in wooden crates and loaded onto horse-drawn drays heading toward the overcrowded, nameless districts on the outskirts of the city. This architectural shift is a physical manifestation of a political doctrine, the prioritization of movement and commerce over community and stability. The planners see a slum that needs clearing. You see a neighbourhood that is being erased. You note how the construction of these new lines create islands, isolated pockets of poverty that are disconnected from the rest of the city, cut off by impenetrable walls of brick and steel. This intentional isolation makes it harder for the people to organise, harder for the local trade unions to coordinate, and easier for the authorities to monitor and police the area. Inside the pub, the conversation has changed. The regulars no longer talk only about wages, they talk about the displaced. The families who have simply vanished, unable to find housing in the rapidly inflating rental market. You see the stress in their faces. A house is not just a shelter, it is the centre of their social world. When that home is destroyed to make room for a rail embankment, the neighbourhood loses a part of its memory. You begin to understand the darker side of this urban progress. The new transit lines are designed to move the workforce into the city for the morning shift and out again by nightfall, treating the inhabitants of the East End as nothing more than a commodity, human cargo to be transported, processed and returned. There is no provision for community, no space for the shared life that happens in the alleys or on the doorsteps. The scale of the city is becoming inhuman, dominated by the requirements of the machine rather than the needs of the people. As you polish a glass, you look out at the towering viaduct. It is magnificent in a cold, austere way, casting a permanent shadow over your street. You realise that you are documenting a period of erasure. The maps of London are being redrawn, and in the process the lived history of the East End is being buried under layers of ashlar and mortar. You have become a keeper of the stories that the planners don't want to hear. The counts of the lives lived behind the walls that are now being torn down. You are the final repository of the community's identity, holding on to a sense of place that the city is desperate to pave over. The air in Whitechapel has changed, and it is not the air of political awakening or industry progress. It is the air of suffocating terror. The autumn of 8888 has descended, and with it a shadow that no gaslight can dispel. The name Jack the Ripper is whispered in corners, a name that has become synonymous with the predatory darkness of our streets. For those of us who live here, this is not a headline in the sensationalist papers. It is a visceral, day-to-day reality that has paralysed the spirit of the neighbourhood. The pub, once a sanctuary, has become a place of frantic hush speculation. You notice how the routine of the evening has fundamentally shifted. Women who used to walk home alone after their shifts now travel in groups, their faces tight with anxiety, their eyes constantly scanning the gloom of the narrow, unlit passages. The camaraderie that once defined the streets has been replaced by a pervasive, chilling suspicion. Everyone is a stranger. Every shadow hides a potential threat. You see the impact of this fear on the most vulnerable, the women who work the streets, the very women who are the primary victims, are now live in a state of constant flight. You observe them coming into the Anchor and Crown, not for a drink, but to find a moment of safety, their nerves frayed to the point of breaking. You offer them what comfort you can, but you are helpless against the reality that when they step back out into the night, they are walking into hunting ground. The police response has been heavy-handed and largely ineffective, further deepening the divide between the law and the people of the East End. They swarm the streets, yes, but they do so with a tone of occupation rather than protection. They treat the residents as suspects, conducting rough interrogations and adding to the overall feeling of siege. You see how this fear is being exploited by the press. The penny dreadfuls and the sensationalist dailies sell their papers by painting Whitechapel as a den of inherent vice and criminality. They blame the poverty, the overcrowding, and the moral decay of the residents, completely ignoring the fact that the authorities fail to provide the basic lighting, sanitation, and safety measures that might have prevented these horrors. This period of terror acts as a brutal catalyst for the urban decay you have been observing. The fear factor has accelerated the eviction of families as landlords seize upon the panic to clear out tenements and demand higher rents. The community is fracturing. The trust required to organise for labour rights or sanitary improvements is being eroded by the need to survive the night. As you stand at the bar, you realise that you are bearing witness to the darkest chapter of this community's history. You see how violence, not just from the killer, but from the systemic indifference of the city, is used to break the back of a neighbourhood that was finally standing tall. You have to be even more careful now. The pub is a place where people come to vent their rage and their fear, and you are the one who has to contain it. You keep the doors locked a little earlier. You watch the faces of new arrivals with an intensity that borders on obsession, and you continue to provide the only thing you have left to give, a moment of peace, a steady presence, and refusal to let the terror completely extinguish the light of the East End's resilience. In the wake of the terror, the atmosphere in the East End shifts from one of pure desperation to a strange, nascent hope. You begin to see new faces on the streets, young men and women from the West End, dressed in the modest, practical clothing of the educated classes. They are not here to observe the poverty, as one might visit a zoo. They are here to establish the settlements, a radical experiment in social living. The most prominent of these is Toynbee Hall, established nearby. These settlement houses are built on a philosophy that is revolutionary for the 8880s, that the wealthy and the poor must live side by side to truly understand the other's struggles. You watch as these volunteers open reading rooms, organize cons, and hold lectures on everything from political economy to botany. It's a stark contrast to the charity of the past, which usually involved little more than a bowl of soup and a sermon on moral obedience. These people aren't here to preach, they are here to listen. Inside the Anchor and Crown, the impact is palpable. You serve drinks to students who spend their evenings discussing the swe industries, the illegal, exploitative labour practice in the local garment trade. They bring with them a different kind of knowledge, one that empowers the locals. They assist the labour organizers in drafting better petitions and understanding the legal nuance of the Factory Acts. For the first time, your regulars are not just fighting the system with their fists, they are learning to challenge it with data, argument, and legal manoeuvring. This creates an interesting tension. Some of your older, more cynical regulars view these educated interlopers with deep suspicion, wondering if they are merely gathering research to satisfy their own academic curiosities. But you see the change in the younger generation. The children of the dockers are suddenly learning to debate with a logic that is sharp and precise. The settlement houses provide them with the cultural capital that was previously reserved for the elite, effectively levelling the playing field. Yet you remain the steady anchor. While the volunteers come and go, their lives eventually leading them back to academic posts or positions in government, you are the one who remains. You understand that their work is noble, but it is also a luxury of the privileged. They can leave when the hardship becomes too much. You and the people of the East End do not have that choice. You have learned that true change is not just about these enlightened incursions from the West. It is about the long-term, gritty endurance of the community itself. You take note of this duality. The settlement houses provide the tools, but the East End provides the strength to use them. You observe how the pub now serves as an informal extension of these education centres. A man might learn about the history of labour in a lecture at the Hall, but he comes to the Anchor and Crown to test that theory against the reality of his own life. You are referee in this synthesis of theory and practice. You are keeping the space where these two disparate worlds, the elite reformers and the marginalised labourers, meet, clash, and occasionally create something entirely new and stronger than the sum of its parts. The small smoky tables of the Anchor and Crown are no longer just places for venting grievances. They have become the tactical command centres for a new political reality. The conversation has shifted from immediate survival to long-term governance. You listen as your regulars, men who once believed that Parliament was a distant, unreachable fortress, now discuss the necessity of electing their own. The idea of labour representation is no longer a fringe socialist fantasy, it is becoming a practical necessity. You are witnessing the germination of what will eventually become the Labour Party, The transition is fascinating to watch. It begins with the realization that the Liberal and Conservative parties, the traditional duopoly, do not represent the interests of the man with the soot-stained hands. Through the networks created by the trade unions and the intellectual support of reformers from Toynbee Hall, the workers of the East End are learning how to lobby, how to form local committees, and how to align with the growing national movement for political representation. You see the shift in their demeanour when a candidate from the newly formed Independent Labour Party comes to visit the area. The pub becomes the primary venue. You watch as these men, often workers thems who have educated them through the very pamphlets you curate, speak with a newfound confidence. They are no longer asking for charity. They are demanding a seat at the table. They speak of universal suffrage, of workplace safety, and of the state's obligation to provide for its citizens. This is a dangerous time for them. The establishment is watching. You notice the subtle increase in the presence of plainclothes detectives lurk near the pub, documenting the names of the speakers and the attendees. You have become a silent guard, ensuring that your pub remains a secure space for this nascent political assembly. You have developed a sixth sense for recognize who belongs and who is an interloper, sent to stir up trouble or gather intelligence for the authorities. The struggle is evolving from a localized, desperate fight into structured national movement. You see the pride in the faces of the older dockers as they realize their sons are learned to articulate their demands in ways that the powerful cannot ignore. It is a slow, agonizing process. There are setbacks, internal conflicts, and moments where the dream seems to stall under the weight of political infighting. Yet the momentum is undeniable. You realize that your role as the barmaid has expanded. You are now the gatekeeper of a movement. By maintaining the order of the pub, you are enabling the structural development of the movement itself. You see how the act of serving a pint is no longer just a transaction. It is a way of sustaining the energy required for the long game of political reform. You are watching the blueprint of the 20th century being drawn on the scratch tables of your tavern, and you know with a quiet, certain pride that you are the one holding the lantern for those who are building it. The Anchor and Crown has always been a space where the rhythm of the city is felt most acutely, but lately the tenor of the conversation has changed. It is no longer just the dockers and the union men who hold the floor. A new, fierce energy has permeated the room, the voices of women who are no longer content to be the silent supporters of their husbands' struggles. They have begun to gather in the corners, not to gossip, but to debate the nature of their own disenfranchisement. You watch as the women, many of whom work 15-hour days in the garment factories or washhouses, begin to articulate a simple but radical truth. If they are subject to laws of the land, they should have a hand in making them. You see the influence of the suffragette movement filtering down from the middle-class reformers into the gritty reality of Whitechapel. It is not an abstract theory for these women, it is a question of survival. They see how the laws governing child labour, sanitation, and housing directly affect their daily lives, and they realise that without the vote they are merely perpetual victims of policy. This is a dangerous territory. Even among the Labour men, the idea of votes for women is often met with patronising dismissal or outright hostility. You observe how your pub becomes a microcosm of this societal clash. You see the arguments break out, the men clinging to the traditional patriarchal order of the household, and the women, emboldened by their own experiences in the workplace, challenging that order with a logic that is impossible to ignore. You are the referee in these disputes, often stepping in to ensure that the respect for the speaker, regardless of gender, is maintained. You note the shift in the nature of their labour. The sweighted industries, small, illegal workshops where women are exploited through cheap clothing for the West End, are becoming the breeding grounds for this new activism. These women work in crowded, stifling conditions, often for a pittance that barely covers the rent for a single room. Through their collective misery, they are forming bonds of solidarity that are far more resilient than those of the men. They share child, rearing duties, they pool their meagre food resources, and now they are sharing the radical pamphlets that advocate for political emancipation. You find yours drawn into their circle. You are no longer just the barmaid, you are a confidante, a safe keeper of their organane lists, and a witness to their transformation. You see how the act of organane is empowering them. A woman who once apologized for taking up space in the pub now stands at the centre of the room, articulating a vision of a future where her daughter will not have to endure the same exploitation. The police and the authorities are even more suspicious of this development. They view these meetings as potential riots, unable to comprehend that what are seeing is not a threat to public order, but the long, overdue birth of a democratic conscience. You realize that you are documenting the silent yet unstoppable expansion of the democratic sphere. The struggle for the vote is not just about the ballot box. It is about the right to be recognized as an individual citizen capable of determining one's own fate. As you listen to their passionate late-night debates, you know that the society they are building is one you will never inhabit, yet you are the foundation upon which that future is being constructed. The Anchor and Crown has never felt more like the nerve centre of the East End than it does now, in the final years of the 8890s. The walls are plastered with maps of distant lands, and the air is thick with the names of places most of your regulars could never find on a globe. Transvaal, Orange Free State, Moff Keing. The Boer War has arrived, and it has brought with it a complex, contradictory wave of patriotism that is slow turning into harsh, cold reality. Initially, the pub was alive with a jingoistic fervour. Young men desperate to escape the grinding cycle of the docks and the sweatshops viewed the call to arms as an adventure, or at least a steady meal and a uniform. You watched as the patriotism of the empire was sold to them through posters and music hall songs, painting the conflict as a quick, glorious endeavour. But as the months stretched into years, and the reports of disaster and stalemate began to filter back, the mood in the pub shifted irrevocably. You witnessed the toll of the war in the most personal way. It isn't the grand tactic decisions that dominate the conversation. It is the casualties. When a telegram arrives at a home in the neighbourhood, the silence that follows is devastating. You notice how the young men who were once so eager to enlist are now replaced by weary, broken veterans, returning with stories of a war that felt less like a crusade and more like a slaughter. The realization hits the neighbourhood. The empire's expansion is being paid for in the blood of their brothers and sons. The political discourse in the pub becomes increasingly sophisticated and critical. The discussions about the Boer War morph into critiques of imperialism itself. People start to ask, why are they fighting in a distant land, while their own children are starving in the streets of London? Why is the government spending millions on cannons and logistics in South Africa, while the tenements of Whitechapel continue to crumble? The war becomes a mirror that reflects the failures of the British establishment. You see the rise of Little Englandism, a political stance that calls for the nation to focus on domestic reform rather than overseas conquest. This isn't a betrayal of their country, it is a declaration of loyalty to their own people. You observe as the activists who once obeyed the laws begin to argue against the morality of a war that seems to be enriching the elite while pauperizing the worker. They are beginning to see the connection between the colonial exploitation abroad and their own domestic exploitation at home. As you stand behind the bar, polishing a pint glass, you realize you are documenting the end of an age. The Victorian era, with its blind faith in progress and the inevitability of the empire's dominance, is dying. It is being replaced by a more cynical, more informed, and more demand consciousness. The people of the East End are no longer subjects of a crown, they are becoming critics of a system. You have been the witness to this entire transition, holding the space where the myth of the empire was challenged and replaced by the hard, one reality of the common man's perspective. The nude travels through the streets of Whitechapel not with the speed of a telegraph, but with the heavy, sombre cadence of a funeral march. Queen Victoria is dead. For over 60 years she has been the immutable symbol of an era, a constant, unwavering presence that defined the identity of the British people. In the Anchor and Crown, the news is met with a silence so profound it feels as though the very air has thickened. You watch the faces of your regulars men who have lived their entire lives under her reign. For them, the Queen was more than a monarch. She was the personification of the state, the mother of the empire, the invisible hand that governed their world. Now with her passing, that foundation feels strangely fragile. The pub is draped in an impromptu, subdued mourning. Even the most radical firebrands, those who spent years criticizing the empire, find them hushed. There is a deep, instinctual recognition that the world they were born into has officially vanished. You observe the rituals of grief that ripple through the neighbourhood. Despite the poverty, the black crape appears on doors, the music halls go dark, the usual clamour of the docks seems muffled. 'Tis a collective, psychological anchor being pulled up. You realise that the Victorian age was not just a period of time, it was a psychological framework. It was a belief in industry, in order, in the moral superiority of the British character, and in the inevitable march of progress. With the Queen's death, those certainties are being questioned. The conversations shift from the immediate concerns of labour and politics to a broader, almost existential contemplation. What comes next? The new King, Edward VII, is viewed with curiosity and caution, a man of the world, a contrast to his mother's stern domestic image. People in the East End wonder if the new century will bring the reforms they have fought so hard for, or if it will be a continuation of the old, rigid hierarchies. You see the hope and the fear warring in their eyes. For you, standing behind the bar, the passing of the era feels deeply personal. You have spent decades holding this space, serving the people who built the infrastructure of the century. You have seen the transition from hand labour to machine power, the rise of the unions, the struggle for women's rights, and the darkening of the imperial dream. You know that while the reign of the Queen is over, the work of the people in this room is only just beginning. You clean the bar, wipe away the dust of a dying century. You realise that you are the living history of this place. You have preserved the memory of a generation that will soon be referred to as the Victorians. As the candles burn low in the quiet, shadowed pub, you feel the weight of the moment, the closing of one great, complex chapter, and the terrifying, exhilarating start of another. The 20th century is no longer a concept. It is happening right here, in the shift of the wind and the uncertain, searching looks of your customers. The transition into the 20th century has brought with it a craving for release. The grimy, exhausting reality of the East End requires an outlet, and you find that the Anchor and Crown is no longer the only stage in town. The music halls are booming, dazzling, noisy, and wonderfully chaotic environments that have become the true cultural hubs of the working class. You note how your regulars now come into the pub with a different energy. They are humming the latest tunes from the halls, songs that are often crude, hilarious, and deeply satirical. These performances are not high art, they are the people's art. You watch as a docker performs a clumsy, enthusiastic imitation of a famous music hall comedian, and for a moment the heavy atmosphere of the struggle lifts. The music halls allow these people to laugh at their own hardships, the landlords, the harsh foremen, and even the politicians in Westminster. It is a form of cultural rebellion that is just as potent as any political manifesto. This new culture of entertainment is also changing the landscape of the city. Huge, ornate palaces of variety are rising, decorated with gilded plaster and electric lights, a stark contrast to the soot-stained tenements of the surrounding streets. You see your customers saving their last few pennies, not for bread, but for a seat in the gallery of the local hall. It is an act of defiance against a life of endless labour. It is a declaration that their lives are meant to be more than just survival. You realise that this is a critical development in the psychology of the community. The music halls are teaching them to imagine a world beyond the East End. Through the songs and the sketches, they are exposed to new ideas, different dialects, and a shared sense of identity that spans across the entire city. They are becoming a public, a collective entity that recognises its own power through the shared experience of joy and ridicule. Standing behind your bar, you feel a tinge of envy mixed with pride. You are still the keeper of the quiet space, the place where they come to digest the experiences, to argue about the songs and to connect the satire of the stage with the hard truths of their existence. You have learned that true resilience is not just about endurance, it is about the ability to find humour in the face of despair. The 20th century is proving to be loud, bright, and demanding. The pace is faster, the stakes are higher, and the old rigid Victorian social order is fracturing under the pressure of this new, vibrant mass culture. You are watching a transformation of the human spirit. The people are no longer just workers, they are participants in a modern world. And the music playing in the background is the soundtrack of a society finally beginning to wake up. The gaslight, which has been your silent companion for decades, with its characteristic hiss and the smell of sulphur, is slow becoming a relic. A new, sterile and unforgiving light is beginning to flicker into existence, the electric bulb. You watch as a crew of workers installs the wiring in the ceiling of the Anchor and Crown. The room is finally flipped, the room is transformed. The gentle, warm, and somewhat treacherous glow of gas is replaced by a bright, steady, and blindingly clear illumination. For the first time, there are no shadows left to hide in. Every smudge on the floor, every crack in the paint, and every weary line on a customer's face is exposed in high relief. The coziness that you work so hard to maintain, a soft space where the harshness of the world was tempered by dim light, is suddenly under siege by this technology glare. It feels less like a sanctuary and more like a laboratory. The impact of electricity extends far beyond the light bulb. You see the massive humming dynamis being installed in the local factories, replacing the rhythmic human, scaled labour of the past with the relentless automated pace of the machine. The noise of the city changes. It is no longer just the sound of horses on cobblestones and human voices. but the low-frequency drone of motors and the constant high-pitched whine of electric machinery. You notice how this affects the people. The pace of work is being dictated by the speed of the electricity, not the stamina of the worker. The shift is becoming more rigid, more demanding, and less forgiving. There is an unspoken pressure to keep up, to be as efficient as the wires and the currents that now pulse through the veins of the district. The humanity that you once felt in the shared struggle of the workplace is being drained away, replaced by a cold, industrial efficiency. Yet there is a strange allure to it. You see your regulars, who spent their entire lives in the dark, staring at the electric lamp with a mixture of wonder and suspicion. It represents a future they were promised, but never truly envisioned, a world where the night is conquered and nature is subordinated to the machine. They talk about it as a miracle, even while they complain about the rising cost of the grid and the way it seems to detach them further from the natural rhythms of day and night. You realize that this is the final separation. The technology of the 20th century is building a wall between the human spirit and the physical world. As you stand beneath the steady, unblinking glare of the electric bulb, you feel the weight of your role as a keeper of the old ways. You are observing the final, irrevocable modernization of the East End. You are no longer just documenting the struggle for rights or the shift in politics. You are documenting the dehumanization of the environment itself. The machine has arrived and has no intention of leaving. The air in Whitechapel has grown heavy, not with the familiar coal smoke of industry, but with a palpable unseen tension. The political discourse in the Anchor and Crown is shifting away from local labour reforms and toward the alarming headlines coming out of the Balkans and Berlin. The newspapers, now more sensational and frequent, carry stories of alliances, naval arms races, and the drumbeats of approaching conflict. You watch as your regulars, men who had spent years fighting for their own rights, now find themselves caught in the gravitational pull of a looming continental tragedy. You see the shift in the young men who frequent the pub. The jingoism that was once a faint, distant whisper during the Boer War is now a roar. The state's propaganda machine is working in overdrive, utilizing the very tools mass communication, posters, public speeches, and the cinema to cultivate a fierce, unwavering nationalism. It is as if the collective identity of the working class is being forcibly rechanneled into the service of the empire. They are being told that their true enemy is not the slum landlord or the exploitative factory owner, but the other across the border. Inside the pub, the division is stark. You witness the arguments between the die-hard socialists who preach that a worker has no country and that this is merely a war of kings and capitalists, and the younger generation who are intoxicated by the prospect of a great adventure and the promise of national glory. You, as the witness, see the tragedy unfolding before it even begins. The hard-won solidarity of the labour movement is fracturing along the lines of national allegiance. You notice how the authorities are now watching the pub with even more scrutiny. Any talk against the war is labelled as defeatism or even treason. The freedom of speech that you fought so hard to protect within these walls is narrowing. You have to be more subtle, more guarded. You see the recruits marching through the streets, their heads held high, unaware that they are marching toward a slaughterhouse. Their mothers watch from the doorways, their faces tight with a fear that they are not allowed to express, for to grieve before the war has even begun is seen as unpatriotic. You feel a profound sense of foreboding. The rise of literacy, the empowerment of women, the formation of political parties, all of it feels fragile. like a house of cards waiting for the first gust of a hurricane. The 20th century is showing its true face. It is an age of industry-scale destruction. You realize that you have spent your life nurturing a community that is now on the verge of being sacrificed to the insatiable hunger of a global conflict. You pour the drinks, you listen to the arguments, and you record the shifting winds in your ledger of memory. You see the faces of the boys who will never return, the men whose ideals will be shattered by the mud of the trenches, and the women whose lives will be fundamentally altered by the loss. You are no longer just a barmaid in Whitechapel. You are a sentry guarding the final moments of a world that is about to be burned away. The catastrophe is no longer coming, it is already here, embedded in the very structure of the times. The call to arms arrives in Whitechapel, not as a request, but as a vacuum that pulls the very lifeblood out of the East End. You watch as the familiar faces, the regulars who argued over labour laws and debated the future of the nation, line up at the recruiting stations. The pub, once the site of heated political debate, becomes a place of hollow echoes. The vibrant, stubborn and resilient community you have spent your life documenting is being dismantled, man by man, sent off to the mud of the Western Front. You witnessed the profound transformation of the domestic sphere. With the men gone, the responsibility of the entire community falls upon the shoulders of the women. The garment factories and the dockyards, now working around the clock to support the war effort, are staffed by the very women who, only a few years ago, were dismissed as incapable of political engagement. You see them navigating this new reality with a grit that is both inspiring and heartbreaking. They are the ones who keep the city functioning, despite the rations, the shortages, and the gnawing, constant anxiety of the casualty lists. The Anchor and Crown has changed its character completely. The evening debates have been replaced by a stifling silence, occasionally broken by the reading of the latest letter from the front or the dreaded arrival of a telegram. You notice that the patriotism that was so loudly proclaimed at the start has withered into a grim, quiet endurance. People no longer talk about glory. They talk about the weather in Flanders, the quality of the boots, or the last time they heard from their sons. You see how the war has fundamentally altered the social fabric of London. The rigid class distinctions that defined the Victorian era are being eroded by the sheer scale of the shared sacrifice. When death is indiscriminate, the social hierarchy starts to lose its meaning. You observe people from different walks of life, those who once wouldn't have acknowledged each other on the street, sharing the same burden of grief and the same rations. It is a forced, tragic form of equality. As you serve a glass to a young man on his final leave, his face stripped of its youthful innocence, and replaced by a hollow, haunted look, you realize that the world will never return to the way it was. The long 9th century is finally and violently dead. The mechanical, industrial efficiency you saw coming with the electric lights has now been perfected in the machinery of slaughter. You are documenting the end of an era of innocence, the end of the belief that human progress is inherently good. You feel a sense of profound, lingering sorrow. You have been the guardian of this space, the keeper of these memories, and now you are watching as everything you protected is being scattered to the winds. The Anchor and Crown stands, but the spirit of the people has been wounded in a way that no amount of time will fully heal. The silence in the pub is now a heavy, permanent presence, a testament to the lives that have been taken and the future that has been stolen. You are standing in the wreckage of the century you helped to build. The war is over. The bells have finally fallen silent, and the frantic hollow energy of the post-war years has begun to settle over London. The Anchor and Crown still stands, its walls scarred by time and its floorboards worn thin by the weight of 1,000,000 footsteps. But the world it belongs to has been irrevocably altered. You stand one last time behind the bar, looking out at a street that looks almost the same as it did decades ago, yet feels entirely foreign. The ghosts of your regulars, the dockers who fought for their sixpence, the women who demanded their right to choose, the thinkers who gathered under the gaslight, they are all here, woven into the very fabric of the room. You realize that you were never just a witness. You were the mortar that held these disparate lives together. You were the memory of the East End. You kept the records that the history books deemed too small, too common, or too insignificant to mention. You understand now that your immortality was never about living forever. It was about the act of being present, the radical, simple, and profound act of staying. You stayed through the poverty, the cholera, the fear, the progress, and the war. You provided the space where humanity could endure, where it could learn, and where it could mourn. That is your legacy. It is not found in statues or government decrees, but in the resilience of the people who sat at these tables. They were the ones who built the modern world, and you were the one who held their light while they did it. The transition you have been navigating your entire life is now complete. The you that existed as a barmaid, a protector, and a listener is fading, dissolving back in the river of time. But there is no fear. There is only the immense, quiet satisfaction of a task fully completed. The circle is closed. You have documented the transition of a century from the flicker of a gas lamp to the glare of a neon sign, and you have remained true to the pulse of the place that gave you life. As the sun sets over the Thames, the light hits the window of the Anchor and Crown one final time. You look at the empty chairs, the clean counter, and the silence that is no longer empty, but filled with the echoes of 1,000,000 conversations. Everything is enough. Every pint poured, every secret kept, every moment of kindness offered in the face of indifference. It was all worth it. The struggle was the point. The presence was the purpose. You step back away from the counter, away from the history you have carried for so long. The door is closing, not with a slam, but with the gentle click of a latch. You are no longer the keeper of the memory. You have become the memory itself. The long, hard, beautiful labour is finished. You are home. Sleepy History with Benedict is created for relaxation, entertainment, and sleep purposes. The stories shared on this channel are inspired by historical events, daily life, and real periods in history, but they may be simplified, adapted, or narrated in a calming way to enhance the listening experience. This content is not intended to be a precise academic or educational source. While we aim to stay generally accurate, some details may be altered for storytelling flow and relaxation. Please do not rely on this channel as a primary source for historical research or study. By listening, you acknowledge that this content is designed to help you unwind, relax, and fall asleep. Thank you for your understanding and support.